I want to try more live action segments, but do not be surprised if I'm constantly looking away at the camera lens to read my script. Genre bias permeates how we as individuals consume all types of media, even unconsciously. But how does it apply to video games, and how can our comfort zones and desire for new experiences increase when we acknowledge its existence? That's something I wanted to explore in this video of all things, because, well, this is my channel and I'll do what I want. Genre bias can take many forms. It's used to make statements towards a single genre of media based on a few surface characteristics, but it can also be used as a means to categorize our own tastes so we can find out more of what we enjoy. Ultimately, I feel a person's adherence to genre stems greatly from a feeling of safety. Especially when you're an adult, your life is dictated by a multitude of currencies. Your emotional energy, your free time, and, well, currency. We've reached a stage in our respective cultures where everything, including what you do in your spare time in a consequence-free environment, is an investment in some tangible sense. An activity or item, no matter how recreational it may be, must provide a worthwhile return, otherwise you've wasted one of the many limited resources that adorns your routine, and nothing is ever truly consequence-free, even entertainment. This seems to overlap to some extent with experience bias, or in other words, when we don't choose to actively seek out further information and simply root our conclusions in our own beliefs, because doing that extra research is also an investment where we're unsure about the dividends. But what does this mean as it pertains to video games? Put simply, it's difficult to bring yourself to explore unfamiliar styles and genres of games and see what differentiates each item unless you allow yourself to feel like you have nothing to lose. The nuances that distinguish similar games kind of relies on you already knowing and understanding the context and systems of each individual title in order to be more open to what that genre, series, or other categorization can uniquely provide on a case-by-case basis. For instance, I, personally, rarely play Metroidvanias. Not for any particular reason that's at the fault of the genre, it just happens to be something I've hardly given the time to engross myself into. And a negative consequence of that is if you were to show me gameplay of Metroid Dread, Guacamelee, Hollow Knight, and Axiom Verge alongside each other, I can't differentiate them in clear-cut ways. I can't decide which one would be more up my street if I were to buy one of them right now, and I can't decide if the genre will be engrossing for me because I can't spot the unique characteristics that allow each title to uniquely shine due to my inexperience, thus demotivating me to try more Metroidvanias. A small facet of my subconscious is telling me they all look like they play the same, and if they all look like they play the same, then the genre can't be all that interesting, right? This psychological cocktail where we take unfamiliar works and try to fit them into our current understanding of media means a lot of misconceptions can arise when discussing games with other people. In a way, media discourse is kind of broken, because in order to get your points across to someone, it kind of relies on them having a similar understanding of media criticism to you and vice versa. For some hypothetical examples, if you were to say you want an open immersive sim that provides you with a range of options in order to solve tasks and objectives similar to Deathloop, someone who doesn't know what an immersive sim is might think you're asking for an open world Ubisoft game with lots of side quests like Watch Dogs because you said the word open. If you were to say how much you love stealth games like Thief the Dark Project, someone who doesn't play stealth games might think you're saying you love shoehorn stealth elements in games of other genres, like the Mary Jane missions in Insomniac Spider-Man, because they lack understanding of the nuance between different manners of execution and attribute quality to fundamental concepts. And don't get me started on Fallout discourse on whether the best one is 1 or New Vegas, or maybe even 3 if you find that one dude, because that discussion goes so much deeper than what someone's preferences happen to be, and those preferences can vary exponentially depending on how much political philosophy, ludology, and literacy enters the conversation. To summarize, for many different kinds of individuals with varying levels of experience and genre bias, all shooters are like Call of Duty, all racing games are like Forza, all JRPGs are like Persona 5, and we are all susceptible to this line of thinking. For example, if, say, your favorite genre of all time is rhythm games, someone might ask if you play DDR. I think I've realized over time that one of my motivators to cover a variety of rhythm games on my channel is not only because they're the type of game I feel the most comfortable and passionate with critiquing, but as a niche genre, rhythm games are not played by the general audience unless a game releases that is immediately and externally different to anything else the public eye has ever seen. If I showed you gameplay of DJ Max Respect, Rock Band, Demo, and Project SEKAI Colorful Stage, not only would you only be able to identify the four by a few external characteristics like their art style or control scheme, but you'd probably be less motivated to try all four under the idea that simply choosing one fulfills the purpose of choosing all four of them at different points in time, as if one can be an adequate replacement for another, as if Demo is just Rock Band with pianos and that's the end of everything that can ever be said about the game. Spoilers, it's not. And this sort of perception that allows each subject to blur into one this easily can intensely lower the variety of areas that can be taken into account when critiquing media, as it downplays not just the higher, more significant aspects that allow each title to shine in its own way, but it can also hide the true reasons a title could be considered lacking, the cons and imperfections that are a little bit harder to see, but are still ever present in your level of enjoyment. So in essence, exploring more games and getting out of your comfort zone is a bit of a complicated uphill battle, and I think it's important we understand that when we recommend games to each other, and when we're trying to understand each other's preferences, be they positive or negative. All that being said, acknowledging that games in the same genre can have vastly different design philosophies and artistic visions does not immediately mean every game is exempt from criticism simply because you happen to not gel with the vision it's trying to achieve. And that's because these games can thus vary in execution, which is independent from the creator's intent. Not everything in every piece of media was done on purpose. As humans, it is a virtue for us to fuck up in unique ways, but how you interpret the level of intentionality in that fuck up is completely up to you. It doesn't necessarily matter how the author wrote the text if the text is going to continue existing and being interpreted from long after the author has passed. Criticizing and assessing genres and subgenres is also a valuable asset, as it allows you to identify distinctive and quantifiable elements about your favorite genres that you don't enjoy, or it increases your understanding of what it is specifically that makes your favorite entries in a genre so great, what makes them such unique hallmarks when put against the template. So today, I didn't want to just do any old rhythm game review for a singular game, but rather make an assessment over the design philosophies that conform in the genre and how it all comes to play in said title, while chucking it onto some broader thesis about the medium to see what comes out. Because as of writing and recording, I am now rank 122 in the English build of the mobile rhythm game Project SEKAI Colorful Stage featuring Hatsune Miku, with 89 full combos on both hard and expert, because, well, I've never felt the touch of a woman. And just a little precaution, because this has happened before, you might want to take a peek at the length of this video before we start. Okay, the script says I'm doing another Miku rundown. How many times do you guys think I've done this segment by now? Project SEKAI Colorful Stage is a game featuring Hatsune Miku, a virtual singer who is predominantly known to the general audience for her live performances, where living, breathing people gather around a stadium to see an animation sing and dance on a projector screen.
The singer's ugly. She's obviously ugly or something.
In reality, Hatsune Miku is a vocal synthesizer, a voice bank that any musician can purchase and download onto their computer to make virtual vocals sampled from the phonetic data of a real person's voice. It's also commonplace to brand these voice banks with a fictional avatar to add a sense of identity to the voice, allowing it to be incorporated into many different works by different creators without appropriating the commercial and professional image of the voice provider. Hatsune Miku is a fictional character representing a VST plugin for musicians, voiced by Japanese voice actress Saki Fujita, and every single song you hear with Hatsune Miku on vocals is a third-party music piece made by a wide array of artists all around the globe who just happen to purchase the same vocal program, kinda like if they all happen to use the same piano or the same trumpet. Hatsune Miku is the fictional identity of a mere musical instrument for others, rather than a band member or a musician. And despite that existential dread, Miku is a household name and a global icon, not just because of her cute demeanor, but because the wide array of music by literally thousands of different creators allowed there to be this cultural collective bubble for many to thrive in. People are emotionally attached to Miku, and that's not because of a celebrity tier parasocial relationship. Well, maybe a bit, but because culturally speaking, Miku is one of the many representatives of a long line of independent creators who are motivated to find their voice and refine their craft, be they musicians, illustrators, animators, writers, technicians, stans who are just terminally online, and much more. So of course Hatsune Miku doubles as not only as a symbol of self-expression and creativity, but is also the biggest capitalist pig on the planet. If you can slap Hatsune Miku onto something, regardless of its quality or reception, It's gonna sell. And that not only includes this bar of generic milk chocolate I found in HMV that cost me £3 and tastes like it's on the same level of basic bitch as buying the off-brand stuff from Aldi, it also includes video games. Sega's rhythm game series Hatsune Miku Project DIVA being the most notable example. Starting with the original game in 2009 for the PSP, its last good entry being on PS Vita and PS4 in 2016, and the latest entry released in 2022, a PC port of a 2020 Switch reimagining of a 2014 upgrade of a 2010 arcade game. If you want a guide for the DIVA series, there's this handy chart here, and you just want to pretend that this half down here never existed. It was a mistake. Oh god, how did you get here? But this video's not about DIVA. I've already done a video on that actually. It was incoherent, but it was kinda cute, you know? Instead we're talking Sekai, a game that Wikipedia really likes to brand as a spin-off of the DIVA series, so hey, if Wikipedia says it. Project Sekai Colorful Stage featuring Hatsune Miku, later released in the West with the significantly worse title Hatsune Miku Colorful Stage, is a rhythm game that was released for iOS and Android. It's also referred to as a mobage, which is a Japanese term for mobile games. Mobages are fundamentally never good, and it's mostly because they got the words mobile and gay in them, as confirmed by the World Health Organization in 1066, where they were quoted saying, "Pack it up, Skittle Squad." I mean, they had a point, it was July at that stage. Contrary to this weird series classification on Wikipedia, Project Sekai is a significantly different type of rhythm game compared to what can be found over in Project DIVA. Hence that whole intro we did at the start about the many subgenres that can circulate as a base genre grows, and how even the most niche genres can have a lot of distinguishing elements from title to title. My writing's good, I promise. Fact is, no two Miku games are the same, and at times they provide for different purposes that completely uproot their central design philosophy. DIVA can be described best as more being derived from the home arcade school of rhythm game design. The games were purchased up front for systems like the PS3 and PS4, and would primarily have players go through a sequential song list of rhythm game charts straight from the disc. It was pure, straightforward rhythm gameplay that rewarded skill and score chasing, and as players progressed, they would use their accumulated in-game points and milestones earned solely through gameplay to unlock additional content like songs, costumes, and items to incentivize replayability. Sekai, however, treads into a different territory. More specifically, it's Hatsune Miku's foray into what I call the idol gacha. Idol gachas are a specific formula of free-to-play rhythm games that focus on a wide range of different fictional idol performance groups, sometimes called bands, but more commonly referred to as units. The player is taken through an extensive song list containing both licensed and original songs covered by the voice actors who play the many different idol characters. And in turn, players earn rewards and crafting components to power up their characters so they can earn more points in the rhythm game and progress through a series of visual novel storylines that flesh out the backstories and personalities of each unit and its members. As the name suggests, their core business model is gacha systems that boost progression, but other common aspects of idol gachas are frequent seasonal and story events that get added in real time, an energy system that limits progression, online multiplayer to cooperate with other players for higher rarity loot, and most importantly, the games being structured as always online clients, otherwise known as live services, a useful term for your glossary if it's not there already. In other words, idol gachas for the most part are not linear games that are meant to be beaten or completed, but are instead online games updated constantly, akin to a shared environment game or competitive game like Destiny or League of Legends to keep you playing for as long as possible, hence the unifying term live service. For a close approximation, the idol gacha is effectively the rhythm game genre's answer to Genshin Impact, where the latter is both an action RPG and a live service for incorporating all the prior elements like updates and events. Sekai was published by Sega, but specifically was developed as a collaboration between two teams. It was worked on by Sega's internal CS3 team, who made Project DIVA's F, F2, and X, with the notable exclusion of Hiroshi Utsumi, who was the director of those three games before leaving Sega when Project DIVA X was finished. But it was also developed by Colorful Palette, a subsidiary of Craft Egg, who had developed the idol gacha Bandori. So what I ended up finding was a whole bunch of discoveries that aren't new to anyone in the slightest, but they're new to me, so I thought they'd be fun to share. And it's after years of waiting that we are finally here, something that maybe 3 of you asked for. The official Joe's Cafe assessment of Project Sekai Colorful Stage featuring Hatsune Miku from the Devil May Cry series. Alternate title, oh my god, idol gachas are even fucking worse than I thought now that I've actually played one. But they also have some cute stuff in them that I kinda like. I'm not even scrolled to the right part of the script. Fuck. But I want to take a step back and cover my ass in a few ways before we get started, and I will try to do so in a way where I don't sound too condescending, but the natural speaking tone of my voice dictates that I am condescending by nature. For any complaints, take it up with my parents. For those curious, Yes, I am aware that opinions and subjectivity exist when discussing video games. Shocker, I know, the tone of my videos would not give that idea. I don't think objectivity is a very reliable metric to draw from in media, and you can't do an objective or unbiased assessment of a video game. You straight up can't, it's a fundamentally subjective medium. If you see a review online that claims itself to be unbiased, the critic is either fracturing reality or lying. Their bias is inevitably going to impede because it can take many forms and be both conscious and unconscious. Without bias, we'd be mentally unable to perceive or communicate anything whatsoever. It's literally impossible to do so as humans, and what we perceive to be objective in media assessment is merely a series of trends and concepts that happen to be subjectively appealing to a vast majority of people, or they're acknowledged concepts because they help creators more effectively realize their own creative vision. As a little example, art fundamentals. We like to have this idea that studying known concepts in illustration is shoved in our faces as the objectively correct way to draw and paint, when in reality, what your teachers were trying to convey to you is that they want you to expand your skill set so you have more control over your piece and can sculpt your work so it actually looks like the idea that exists in your head, stylization and all. What art fundamentals are not, on the other hand, is an objective metric with which to assess art, but if there's one thing I like, it's tangents for another day.
That is a story for another day.
For anyone who's new to my channel, I often refrain from saying opinionated qualifiers, like, this is just my opinion, because the way I see it, that goes without saying. It's not a requirement because it's implied by the very nature of the medium we're discussing, and it just bogs down the length of a script and weakens the tone of my delivery when I'm constantly worrying about it. It makes the viewing experience of videos like these worse and more sluggish for yourselves, and I kind of want to have the confidence in you and whoever else watches this that that's a mutual agreement between us. And this is often brought up by the people who fucking say that video essayists should edit their scripts so they're not so fucking long. If I'm discussing video games and assessing a video game, I am 100% of the time by default being subjective. So as long as you can take what will at most be a bit of enthusiasm or hyperbolic humor, you'll probably be fine. It's just the internet. There's nothing too serious about it, and if you happen to pass someone in the street who you first interacted with online, you'd be very surprised about how quickly you can cast aside any prior expectations of someone's personality, because speaking from frequent experience, Twitter and YouTube may as well be parallel dimensions of fake bitches, myself included. I'm not excluding myself from this. It is not indicative of how someone actually behaves in a genuine public setting, because by virtue of reading this script, being able to edit what I do and don't say, not having a living, breathing human in front of me to communicate with, and being able to effectively backspace on whatever I want, I am unconsciously playing the persona that I slip into whenever I record for a video. But moving away from social media psychology and over to critical integrity, some of you may be potentially worried about how much the Project DIVA series will be coming into place in my critique, and I regret to inform you that it might do a fair bit, but not because of the reasons you'd potentially expect. Wanting to detach as much comparison between DIVA and SEKAI as possible is kinda fraught, because when we assess media, we base it on our existing knowledge, no matter how hard we try not to do so. Be that existing knowledge a game we played last week, or a life lesson we learned when we were 5 years old. We as individuals determine where the bar of quality, as it were, is located based on our previous positive experiences, and that's ingrained into all of our discussions no matter how hard we try to avoid it. In other words, even if the rhythm game I was covering in this video today did not have Hatsune Miku in it whatsoever, even if it was on a different platform and by a different team, I would still be within my reason to compare it to Project DIVA. And that doesn't mean that DIVA is the better game, or that any game that isn't DIVA is immediately inferior. It's because comparison is a very common means of which to illustrate alternate methods of designing media in a way that's immediately understandable to your audience, and I think a good amount of you are familiar with the Weeaboo game. Because when broken down, video games aren't just built on money, influence, and technical expertise. They're not just built from people polishing them and making them bug-free, as invaluable as those processes are, but they're also built from people with ideas. If I say one of Sekai's biggest problems is it lacks this thing Project DIVA has, that's not me saying Sekai is bad for not being like DIVA point for point. That's me saying that Sekai is failing on its own merits that I can define when judging the game on its own, and the means in which its own merits can be improved would be by using something universal that just so happens happens to also be in DIVA, but is not exclusive to DIVA's formula, as it's present in other games. And I'm referencing DIVA in that critique so you can immediately understand what I'm saying. Comparisons between DIVA and Sekai are kind of a sensitive topic. I get it, because once again, Sekai is such a different game fundamentally that it may as well be considered an entirely new franchise that just happens to unfortunately share an umbrella with others. I can fully understand how the presence of DIVA can muddy the waters and obfuscate what Sekai is aiming for as its own property. It paints the idea in others' heads that if you were to utter critique about one, the main motive and intent behind that critique is because it's not the other. But to assume that much feels not only reductive, but also a bit disingenuous when we could be learning more about both franchises by continuing to make these comparisons. I mean, it's a free conversation about your hyperfixation, which to me sounds like a fucking spa day. When someone criticizes Sekai, that doesn't mean they're endlessly shitting on it because it's not Project DIVA. Funnily enough, people don't always do that. They just like to engage with games in different ways, and one of the many ways you can engage with and have fun with the media you consume is to both discuss the highs and the lows of the title, no matter how hyperbolic or harsh it may seem from the outside looking in, because critique is fun. Talking about things, even if it's talking about shortcomings, is really fun. When I tweet something bad about Sekai, chances are high that I was playing Sekai during that time, and my time with the game became more enjoyable by thinking about it that little bit more. Or as another example, I'm still loving every minute of watching Doctor Who despite the past 3 seasons being a pile of wank, because watching a pile of wank and discussing what made it a big pile of wank is fun. So in a way, no matter how scathing I can be of Sekai, it's allowed me to have more to talk about in terms of what I enjoy most from the genre at large and produce one of the most fun videos I've ever made. If you look at any one video on my channel, there's a common thread that interconnects them, which is that the videos were fun to make. I wrote them, edited them, published them, because they're one of the many ways to externally engage with a game that I found enticing and wanted to share with others. A passion that's just inherent to the vocal synth community as well as creatives in general. And as far as I'm concerned, I just gave someone new background noise to listen to while they play Final Fantasy XIV, so I think I'm carrying out my purpose, and that makes me happy. Long-form video essays have a bad rep, and understandably so when they can be externally perceived as meaningless vitriol by angry people, but in reality, nobody on planet Earth who is making a critical video essay is just relentlessly shitting on something for the purpose of converting you and removing your right to have an opinion, because that's not only a miserable fucking existence, but it's so miserable that I can't see anyone motivated enough to actually finish making a video essay if that were the case. Again, it's the internet. We're having fun here. It's not that serious. If you want to spam my Twitter plug to this video with OK Nerd followed by Mizuki fangams, I actively encourage that. That will never not be hilarious for the both of us. Please do that. People don't tell you to think less about something you like when they put more than 5 minutes into their own thoughts. They're just suggesting that you think more about the media you like, because it's interesting and fun, and it helps us uncover more about what we like and dislike about our hobbies and interests. A novelist called Franz Kafka once wrote about literature being at its finest when it fucks our shit up instead of just being random escapism, and honestly, I'm here for it. This is me respecting Project SEKAI to enough of an extent to want to think more about it, rather than just uninstalling it and feeling like it was a waste of time and space. And is it not an immense compliment to Sekai as a work if it can inspire me to drag myself out of what can be charitably described as an almost year-long hiatus? So, without further ado, let me make a goddamn feature-length video essay about the goddamn anime gacha game. Let me live, for once, in my funny little life. I'm looking through the footage right now, and the one thing that's immediately apparent is that I have the shakes in just all of the clips. I've never done this, like, this extensively, so it's like, fuck me, it's nerve-wracking. Opening my coverage of Project SEKAI with its premise and early game is easily one of the many aspects I've been looking forward to when structuring this video, because it's the strongest thing this game has that is more than worthy of commending. For more of an idea about my first impressions, I had known about Sekai's existence the day it came out in Japan, but didn't actually try it for myself until the English version dropped. And the reason is because I like to experience the entirety of what a game has to offer. Be it significant or supplementary, I like to get immersed in the creative vision of the games I play, so not only did I want to try Sekai for its rhythm gameplay, but I also wanted to read its writing and sink into its characterization. Even if you don't necessarily need to read any text to get to the gameplay, and even if the localization is a bit divisive, I still firmly believe the purest way you can enjoy a video game is playing it in your native language, or at least a language that you can read cohesively, and it was the same reason I enjoyed Project DIVA X. Both PDX and my first few ranks of Project SEKAI were incredibly enjoyable because I waited for the English versions, and I want that to set the tone of this video and the outlook I take with these kinds of games. In terms of story, Sekai takes place in a fictionalized version of our own world, where Hatsune Miku and the rest of the LGBT community make up a unit called Virtual Singer, and everyone sees them the same way that we do in the real world. Incredibly notable fictional characters that double as vocalists for all sorts of iconic music, while sporting their worst canon designs in the entire Peer Pro franchise. I don't know what tilts me more, using Miku V4X, the worst Miku design, or the out-of-place palette-clashing collar they've tacked onto Mako V3.
No, come on, bestie, out the door, now, we are taking you to ASOS!
Beyond reality, however, Hatsune Miku is actually a sentient being who inhabits the void between all worlds, the real world, and a vast expanse of metaphysical worlds called Sekai. Sekai are constructed from the thoughts and feelings of individuals all around the real world. An individual can have their own Sekai, or a group of people can share a Sekai if they're fated to help each other in some way. When the owner of a Sekai accesses theirs, they meet their own personalized version of Miku and her friends, each with their own distinct personality and appearance, with their main goal being to help the Sekai owners discover their true feelings, so those true feelings can form songs. With this, Hatsune Miku invites you, the player, on a journey through 5 Sekai, learning the stories of 5 groups of original characters made for the game, who at one point or another met Hatsune Miku in their own moments of ambition or turmoil. Leonid, More Jump, Vivid Bad Squad, Wonderland Showtime, and Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep a Fragmentary Passage at 25 o'clock, featuring literally the best character in the entire game.
Okay, Miski, your Sekai is the literal endless expanse of suffering and apathy. Are you okay with that?
That's fine. The void's only toxic to miserable people.
The thing that's immediately apparent when you start playing Sekai is the virtual singers have a supporting role in this story. The full Japanese title, Project SEKAI Colorful Stage featuring Hatsune Miku, is significantly more representative of the game compared to its English title, Hatsune Miku Colorful Stage, because at the end of the day, this game is about the original characters and their journeys as people. And contrary to popular belief, I don't think this is a bad thing at all. As a matter of fact, conceptually speaking, Sekai had the premise to potentially make one of the greatest rhythm games ever made, which made me so optimistic as soon as I wrapped up chatting with Miku at the edge of the universe. So, you come here often? Can I go home now? While more Vocaloid-centric titles focus on Hatsune Miku the character, as in how the minty songstress would feel about being the symbol of other people's work and what drives her to sing, Sekai is about Hatsune Miku the cultural icon and the people she helped inspire. Each unit covers a variety of musician archetypes to encapsulate the many different identities and life experiences that the vocal synth umbrella accommodates. Vocal synths contribute to music that's personal, energetic, rebellious, childlike, or contemplative, to provide a voice to everyone around us, and that's what the game sets out to convey. The strongest aspect Sekai has going for it above all else is a very strong creative vision with regards to its premise. The team didn't want to just make a new vocal synth game explicitly about vocal synths and call it a day, but to instead make one with an ever so slightly more grounded tone that directly touches on what vocal synth culture does for the thousands in its many communities, and I love that idea. Many of you might remember that this is what I cited before as a very strong aspect of why I fell in love with Hatsune Miku Project DIVA X, because on top of its rhythm gameplay, visuals, and RPG elements that were good actually don't at me, its means of setting up a world and a goal for the player to chase after allowed the game to also allude to the variety of works that vocal synths played a part in the creation of, through use of a structured storyline and the varied thematic clouds that covered different styles and genres, only to then wrap up with a heartfelt revelation by Miku, where she feels this newfound inspiration to sing for as many people as possible, because what powers her and the world around her is the happiness of those who have been able to become their best self through creation. Project Sekai right out of the gate was clamoring for my love and affection because it's a natural progression of Project DIVA X's themes and aims to lean in further towards those aspects. After a brief rhythm game tutorial in order to further connect with Miku, the game asks a series of questions to harness your connection to the Sekai, setting off your introduction with one of 5 units: bisexual, neurodivergent, minor, narcoleptic, or a fellow anarchist against the gender binary. Players can then freely explore both the real world and the Sekai, listening in on conversations between members of the cast, playing songs, or doing some unit management. Which means it's time to go over our gameplay loop and the mechanics provided. Sekai's main loop is unfortunately where a few faltering aspects start to take form, but before we go into any detail, we'll quickly summarize what we have in front of us. As mentioned prior, Sekai is an idol gacha live service, so its interface is more reminiscent of an online multiplayer game rather than a single-player campaign. What this means is, unless you're well versed enough in the subgenre, Sekai's interface and systems are plentiful to the point of being a bit messy and overwhelming. Menus, events, currencies, attributes, numbers, percentages, exchanges, 5 completely different fucking leveling systems. It's living out the fantasy of being a digital pop diva who's also outrunning the IRS. There's just a lot to the point of where you basically need to dedicate an entire session to exploring all of the game's menus before you even play a song, and a lot of very basic min-maxing elements that are imperative to progress at a decent pace, like MR5ing all your 1s and 2s to spam character ranks, and unlocking side stories to farm in-game currency, are never really explained, mostly because the publisher benefits from you not knowing about any of that right away. This is a very common loop with live services that you'll find present in a bunch of other games that may contextualize that feeling you may have had, where you try a mobile game for a couple of hours, and then immediately uninstall it out of either disinterest or being overwhelmed. The game is not content with actually immersing you in all of its systems in a way that makes you engaged like a structured game would, because not knowing about the ideal way to play the game will make you more likely to make mistakes, like progressing slower than normal, or wasting precious currencies, which will in turn push you ever closer to the game's monetization systems. I said before that gacha games are easy to bully when you've never touched them, because anyone with a conscience can understand how the systems are awful and predatory, but they're even more fun to throw onto the coals when you give them a try yourself and discover how deep it goes, like a fungal infection. I'd like at least one person in the audience to tell me cohesively what the fuck Colourful Plus gives you in full, because this infograph sure as shit was not made with the purpose of calmly communicating the fine print to its consumer base, as made evident by how even the literal fine print is a fucking mess. 500 free crystals. Wait, aren't I still paying for them though? The main mode in Sekai is Show, where you can play the rhythm game in a variety of different modes like single player and co-op. You play a song on one of 5 difficulty levels, and if you clear a song, you're taken through to the rewards screen, where you earn XP, crafting components, and currencies. The quantity of the show rewards and XP you get is also determined by your energy. Sekai has a stamina system where you can generate more by either waiting it out, leveling up your player rank, or spending crystals, the game's premium currency.
Joey, why does it say paid 70? Joey, did you spend money on Sekai? I can explain.
The rhythm game is still perfectly accessible to play even if you don't have energy, so you can play as many times as you like, but without it, your show rewards and XP isn't multiplied, making the rewards so small and pathetic that there's zero point in playing the rhythm game whatsoever until you get some back. And after some time doing shows, you can then go into the story tab, which lets you read the visual novel chapters you've currently unlocked by leveling up your units. And through intense concentration and internalizing every single character motivation and story arc to empathize with the creative vision of the game's writers, etc., you can earn more crystals and another currency, music cards, which can be redeemed at the music shop for more songs. So the loop is simple: play songs, unlock story chapters, unlock more songs. But you're probably curious about what these crystals actually do. They regenerate stamina, which is arguably the most viable way to use them when you're at the late game, but they're also the main currency you can purchase from the microtransaction menu to make pulls in the gacha. Sekai has unit management mechanics, where before playing a song you can construct a team of 5 characters from the cast, and ultimately they're your main means of earning higher scores in the rhythm game in order to earn more high-value loot, most notably from the game's most significant score value, talent, a number that determines how viable your characters are. In idle gachas, when you've just started the game, even the most skilled play can only get you a C rank, so the power of your JPEGs is imperative to progressing in the game's skill tree, and to improve your JPEGs, you need to get some higher value ones from the gacha menu. The player can choose from a variety of different banners that swap out every couple of weeks. You can purchase pulls using your crystals, but some banners also have options to pull for less so long as they're crystals you paid for with real money. Yes, you heard me right, the game differentiates between which crystals you earn for free and which ones are paid for, because the design of idol gachas are overseen by literal sociopaths. In fact, you know that subscription service, Colourful Plus? Yeah, it's straight up a scam. Most of the offers you get when you're subscribed to it only apply to banners that require paid crystals, and most of the crystals you get from Colourful Plus are designated as free ones so that you can't use them on those offers. So it's a service where you spend money for opportunities to spend more money. For an idea of the game's economy, 300 crystals for 1 pull equates to roughly $2.99 USD, while 3,000 crystals for a 10 pull is roughly $24.99. 10 JPEGs or Auntie-Gemma's insulin, the choice is rather simple, no? After you pull from the gacha, you're given a random selection of cards in line with the rates of the banner you've selected, which can have rates like a less than 1% chance of earning a super specific 4-star, the highest rarity in the game. A fun little history lesson about gacha, by the by. The only reason you can see the odds in gacha games nowadays is so their asses don't get fined for breaking a variety of international gambling laws. Nations like China and Belgium recognize loot boxes, gacha, and such other paid randomization mechanics as having similar behavior to a lottery ticket, and thus they're defined as gambling. And any games where they don't show the rates, it's because they found a legal loophole, such as when Activision Blizzard started selling coin packs in free loot boxes, so that way the Chinese government legally can't declare that Overwatch has paid gambling in it. But I think it's kind of telling how things are right now when the App Store is promoting and distributing a game that is both rated as appropriate for audiences aged 9+, but is also required to abide by gambling regulations. Isn't the game industry just so fine right now? From the gacha, it's possible to earn 2 stars, the sprite cards that you already own the vast majority of, and 3s and 4s, more powerful cards that have more unique, elaborate artwork of a character, as well as higher level caps and more powerful stats. It's in the characters section that you can then assemble different team builds to improve the amount of talent you have before your next show, as well as partake in a series of upgrading and leveling processes where you smash together your crafting components and currencies to make your existing cards more powerful and their buffs more effective, so you have a higher base talent level. And there are dozens of leveling systems and menus to buff your team. Leveling, upgrading, mastery, skill ups. Yes, these are 4 separate menus that do different things. You can purchase decorations and plants that add even more talent multipliers using resources like charms, gems, coins, and the seed. And the coins literally only exist to stop you from actually spending the resources you already own an abundance of. You can grind character ranks by doing missions, which not only earns crystals and items, but each character rank also adds a permanent 0.1% talent buff to all of that character's cards. I mean, that's kinda neat. And you then repeat this loop while following the game's continuously ongoing storyline that takes place over 3 different story sections. The main story, a series of 20-chapter prequels that show how each unit first formed by leveling them up, side stories, little episodes involving specific characters which are accessed by buffing your cards, and the main attraction, the event stories, where a new seasonal event unveils every couple of weeks and you have a limited real-world time frame to grind event points to redeem rare loot and access story events that take place after the main scenario. With such arcs as The Nightmare the Literal Day Before Christmas, Mizuki Deserves Actual Friends Who Like Them, and Don't Sex, featuring the worst font choice of 2022. No wait, I got one even worse for you. Hang on. Smile of a Lapima. This is all without mentioning outfits and accessories, literally the rarest and most expensive fucking items in the entire game. The Wish Piece Exchange, where you can spend your precious wish pieces on crafting components. Please do not do this, like seriously do not, the Wish Piece Exchange is a scam. The Gacha Sticker System, where as you pull from a banner, you earn gacha stickers that when accumulated can be used to directly purchase any cards you haven't yet obtained. Fuck off. And the Virtual Show, where you can earn crystals by tuning into live concerts with everyone else in the game's community. It's literally watching virtual live concerts with everyone, it's actually kinda sick. Project SEKAI is a huge game in terms of all the mechanical systems it has to offer beyond just the rhythm gameplay, and because of that, you have no idea how much I had to cut tearing into this whole thing. The first draft of this video had a 4,000 word expose critiquing the functional aspects of gacha and how they make games fundamentally worse. I might repurpose that into a different video later down the line, but what I realized as I wrote more and more about the game is that SEKAI has less obvious issues beyond its gacha. Gacha and similar live service monetization is egregious and morally bankrupt in of itself, but I don't have any interest in making the core identity of this video gacha bad if it's going to divert attention from the actual thesis I have for this game, because, well, we all know gacha's bad, right? That's an ice cold take. I just think I should do both of us a favor and cut things down a little bit to the relevant nitty-gritty. So we're going to be moving straight onto some gameplay. If we ignore all the external stuff for a sec, how is Project SEKAI Colourful Stage featuring Scrimblow Bimblow as a raw mechanical rhythm game? The grand conclusion is, it's mid. Like we're talking a C- or a D. Based on Tunithm, another rhythm game by Sega, Sekai is a traditional V-scroller. Notes fall from the top, you tap them when they reach the bottom, you have hold notes that can be dragged around, and you also have swipe notes. Swipe notes that, surprising PSA, don't actually require you to swipe in the direction the arrow indicates. You can swipe them in literally any direction for them to work. And discovering that made the game infinitely more playable, like... upward swipe arrows in a V-scroller, are you guys fucking unhinged? One thing that immediately sprung to mind as I played is that Sekai is easily the smoothest and tightest rhythm game I've played on iOS in terms of input fidelity. It's no contest. I've played Demo 1 and 2, Citus 1 and 2, Voice, Archaea, Musinx, Noise Starlight, Lanota, Tonesphere, a few other idle gachas I tried like Bandori and Utano Prinsima, and much, much more. It's all starting to pile up into a big blur, honestly, because the rhythm game genre sure does love to be ambitious. And they all run into a similar issue where even when they're calibrated properly, there's still some amount of clunkiness you have to mentally account for as you play, due to the level of feedback, the strictness of the gesturing, or just the general feel behind its controls. Sekai, on the other hand, just felt tight from the get-go. It's snappy, it's responsive, and while there are some inevitable stumbles like framerate dips when a background MV gets too demanding, Tondemo Wonders literally crashed my entire fucking phone. I was pleasantly surprised at how much the game just behaved without me needing to compensate or intervene all that much. When my combo drops, it doesn't really feel like it's the game's fault all that much. I also have a fair amount of respect for how this game was very clearly optimized with thumbplay in mind. The game is very much playable on phones even when you get to higher difficulties, and that doesn't mean the charting suffers that many nerfs or feels undercharted. If anything, overcharting is a bigger problem in this game, and they still manage to pull off thumbplay smoothly. The general scale of the rhythm game is also pretty damn good, to the point where you don't feel locked out of specific subsets of it just because you haven't spent enough money or your card setup isn't good enough. Music cards are primarily earned through grinding XP in events, and the game chucks out so many that I've always been able to buy every song in the game while still having enough left over for 10 or so extra songs later down the line. You're never gonna hurt for any currency that actually gets in the way of you enjoying the rhythm game in isolation, and if the rhythm game is all you care about, it's extremely easy to play the game long term without buying anything. All this means that Sekai works as an effective rhythm game to have lying around on your device if you're a rhythm purist that isn't too fussed about all the additional systems and you just want to keep playing songs until you're done for the day. Especially as, once again, you can still play songs even if you lack energy, as the energy system is just for multiplying your show loot and XP. But unfortunately, I'm not one of those kinds of players. And it's when we expand further on how rhythm games can be assessed that Sekai unfortunately begins to fall apart when looked beyond just having tight controls and lots of content. Sekai is fine, in the sense that it presents a mechanical structure that doesn't exactly have anything immediately wrong with it. But there's nothing that's particularly amazing about the game either, due to the systems it implements and how it's structured. To understand all that, we need to step away from the game and go over another concept of games critique. To some extent, I'm known for having a somewhat picky and out-of-the-box way of looking at my favourite genre, rhythm games. But let's have a think for a moment of what it is you could look for in a rhythm game that would have you determine if it's a game worthy of your time. Maybe if it has a high song count with dozens of post-launch content to keep you coming back to it for hours, if it has exceptionally hard charts to keep you engaged, or if it was just generally well made to the point where nothing in the game really bothers you enough to make you want to stop playing it. Quality dictated by an absence of shortcomings. I've had dozens of rhythm games in my library before where they all more or less contained these elements, and I still didn't like the game one bit. Either I was burned out too quickly, or the game still failed to hook me in when I first played. Some of you may remember in my Project DIVA video how I cited my two favourite DIVA games as F Second and X, and then did a little aside about how Project DIVA Future Tone, the arcade game with the hardest charts and 200 plus songs, is easily one of my least favourite rhythm games that represents the antithesis of what I enjoy in the genre. So, how can a game rank lower for me when in an easily quantifiable sense, games like Future Tone provide significantly more than any of my favourite highest ranking rhythm games? How can a game tick all of a genre's boxes and not necessarily do anything wrong, but still be unappealing nonetheless? And extending from these questions, what exactly is it that I see in my favourite rhythm games that allowed them to provide more for me? Demo is most infamously known as a rhythm game I like to supposedly overpraise as one of the highlights of the genre. It seems to be an absurd prospect because its charts are far too simple, its mechanics too straightforward, and it's not as tightly designed compared to the likes of Archaea and Sekai. Dance Central VR is a particularly bizarre choice for an S tier rhythm game and the best VR rhythm game game, as surely it's just a ripoff of Just Dance but with a toaster on your face. Not even die-hard Dance Central fans reacted to the VR game all that well, because all they saw was a series of simplified and nerfed routines that you have to play while adorning yourself with the crumbling social structures of the metaverse. I've received comments before that pointed out the absurdity of my standards towards this genre. The idea that I supposedly only prioritize new ideas in these games, or the idea that I'm analyzing video games as I would books, rather than just looking at them in more simple terms like how fun they are. But does that mean I'm simply not a gameplay person with regards to how I look at games, and can my taste simply boil down to whether or not a rhythm game has a story? No, of course not. Otherwise I wouldn't be so invested in a genre that primarily builds itself from its gameplay, and I wouldn't be so disappointed in Sekai because the story is about half of its package. I look at rhythm games the way I do because I just prefer to look at the genre holistically. I believe there are two main critical frameworks with which to assess games. It's not that one is better than the other, but more that the two are supposed to work in tandem with each other to help us further understand why we love the games we love, and specify where we're coming from when we're sharing our thoughts with others. So, here's my hypothesis. Firstly, we have what I call categorical critique. Video games are a fascinating medium because they count as their own artistic medium, but functionally speaking, they're a combination of different mediums fusing together. A video game consists of gameplay, but it's also visual, sound, writing, and so much more. Categorical critique is effectively the act of assessing games based on the quality of these categories in isolation, and then using their cumulative quality to come to a conclusion. And looking at games this way also means that if an amount of the categories are weaker, the others are able to pick up the slack, depending on what the player perceives to be the demands of the game. You've probably seen this before with other YouTube game reviewers and journalists, especially ones just starting out. That's not a dig, that's just the way things work, because I don't think we, including myself in this, truly understand just how hard writing is. You need a concise and organized way of which to assess the game you're playing because you're a newcomer to writing and critique. So you simply divide each medium into a different category that you can write about on its own to compartmentalize your thought process. Let's say you're reading an article reviewing a game, and it reads the following. The gameplay is incredibly fun and gets an A+ from me. However, the game is hampered by its boring F- story, drab C visuals, and its uninspired D soundtrack, so I think it gets a C- overall. The critic in this instance is incorporating categorical critique. Each medium is taken aside as its own item and evaluated with its own merits. Now, categorical critique is beneficial in terms of organizing and specifying our exact areas of discussion when playing games. When discussing a video game story with a friend as it pertains to functions like the text and themes, it helps to emphasize to that friend when you're talking about dialogue or character motivation, rather than something intrinsic to gameplay, like a character's AI when playing the game itself. However, categorical critique starts to fall apart when used on its own for too long, as it completely glosses over the fact that the video game is its very own standalone medium. Everything that is in a game has purpose for the whole video game. So it's also important to evaluate how these multiple mediums interconnect to enrich one whole experience. Categorical critique proposes that we acknowledge video games as a collection of multiple parts acting independently. But what if we were to look at games as the medium, the sole medium, the one medium? Looking at games from this perspective is what I like to refer to as practicing holistic critique. Holism is the theory that various systems and concepts in the world can be interpreted as whole singular entities due to the interconnectedness of the many parts that sustain it. It is the broad inverse of categorical critique. In turn, holistic critique in video games is the act of every single interconnecting factor of a title, regardless of how interactive or fun it is, having some form of role in making the game as a unique form of media more engaging towards its audiences or fulfilling the creative vision of its directors. It's the act of looking at a film as a film, rather than looking at direction and writing as two separate items that never inform each other. Of looking at a car, rather than assessing each individual part that makes the car. So let's say you read another article of another person reviewing the exact same game. It reads, not only are the gameplay mechanics good on their own, but the story contributes to motivating the player with its provocative themes, actively making the game more fun and immersing the player in the role of the character they're playing as in the story. The soundtrack and visuals are also an immense driving force for both the gameplay and the story, as they not only feel thematically appropriate, but they emotionally charge each set piece to make the player feel like they're having an impact on the world they're interacting with. This is a review using holistic critique. If we took this hypothetical game and both of these hypothetical reviews, these individual rankings from the categorical review fade away in their relevance, because at the end of the day, the categories are not the standalone products being graded to be be consumed individually. They're all interconnected and combined into one singular, let's say B+ entity, where everything feels built with purpose to add to the core experience being given to the player, and any downsides the game may have are only highlighted because they held the core back, not necessarily because they're objective flaws that have no place in video games. For example, you could mention the controls in a game being clunky in just about any title, and that would lose the game points, categorically speaking. But what if holistically it gave the game points, because it helps the story and environment become more tense and arduous, connecting the player and the main character on a more emotional level, making the game more exciting and interesting, or in other words, fun. Not only does holistic critique challenge the very idea that a game's scale or entertainment value is the only discerning factor of quality, but it also poses the theory that literally everything about a game beyond its gameplay can make it more fun to play, or to phrase differently, engaging to its audience. Because video games don't need to be fun to be good, they just need to be investing to make you continue playing them and yearn to be involved in the experience they give you. Reggie Fils-Aimé is just an incorrect hack fraud who enjoys being wrong, and this one quote made literally everyone in the game industry get a nerf to their intelligence. Apologies to Reggie Fils-Aimé. To apply this theory to rhythm games, Project DIVA Arcade can be categorically seen as a good game, because it has hours of gameplay, it's very challenging, and you can't really identify any actual flaws or problems that get in the way of you playing the game. But holistically, it's very uninspired and lacking, as made evident by how every time another arcade port drops, anyone who has taste just gets incredibly tired and wants this cycle to end. The note types that are incorporated into the arcade gameplay don't feel musically charged to give the player any catharsis with the soundtrack, and the only thing that motivates you to play the game is beating your high scores with no external modes, narratives, or systems. To contrast, Project DIVA X could be categorically seen as a very lacking game, due to its song count of 24, having a narrative that slows down the gameplay, RPG mechanics that don't reward skill as strongly as the other games, and some fairly simple charts that you could full combo with minimal effort. But holistically, X is one of the most engaging and heartfelt rhythm games ever made. It's a completely enthralling experience from beginning to end as you go on this cute little journey with a bunch of Vocaloids and dress them up in these wonderful outfits before you drum away to satisfying and mechanically diverse charts that feel very purposely designed to make the player feel like they're directly interacting with the music and the world. The game has inputs and note types that are only used in specific musical contexts. The story presents your rhythm gameplay as the very action that is progressing the narrative, and it frequently showers the player in cosmetic rewards that not only feel very much earned, but require using to mechanically progress in the game beyond the aesthetics, giving the player new, substantial, game-affecting decisions that influence the gameplay, allowing the player the agency to make their time spent with PDX feel like theirs. But for some wider examples to really hit the point home, let's apply this theory to the AAA game industry and what exactly gamers want from their titles. There was discourse during the 2021 Game Awards last year, and I know gamers argued about the gamer thing as hardly news, but this is more pertinent, because Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy won Best Narrative, and advocates of the game on social media insisted that it was deserving of its award, and illustrated that point by showing cutscenes from the game. But detractors were still left unsatisfied. It still wasn't believed to be a worthy victor of Best Narrative based on what the detractors had watched. So, did they just not like the cutscenes? What was the reason? Well, the advocates only showed cutscenes. Showing cutscenes and dialogue from your games only demonstrates how the writing is categorically good. That the writing in isolation is fine, but it doesn't tell us anything about if that storytelling weaved with the game design to connect with the player in an effective way that works with the medium. For all I know, Guardians probably did deserve the award, but the discourse that came from it was fraught and accomplished nothing because of a misunderstanding of what gamers demand from a category such as Best Narrative. Because narrative doesn't literally just mean the story and the dialogue, or to phrase academically, the text. It refers to the narrative the designer has the reader, player, viewer, etc. experience through every corner of the medium, like the interactivity, visuals, and sound. Every game has a narrative of sorts that the designers are leading you through in more ways than just text. Even the minds behind a title like Minecraft set out to provide the tools and systems for the player to construct their own journey, and that enriches the title beyond the buttons you press. Here's a tweet from a developer of Minecraft saying that the game sets out to provide the tools and systems for the player to construct their own journey, and that enriches the title beyond the buttons you press. Contrast showing the cutscenes from Guardians with another nominee in the Best Narrative category, Hazelight's It Takes Two, a game that on the surface presents a very basic divorce bad marriage good story that's full of holes. It has text that doesn't really stand up to modest scrutiny, but the game heightens that text through a co-op platforming challenge where you bond with the main characters by directly interacting with every individual facet of their adventure, including the moments of levity levity with the assistance of a close companion you play alongside. The game not only bursts at the seams with characterization, but it also proposes interesting talking points for you to discuss with your co-op partner as you engage in the emotional labor of having to complete tasks with the dependence of another player, meaning that no matter how many writing flaws It Takes Two would have in its immediate text if it were evaluated as a film or a book, it still contributed to the rest of the game to easily become me and my boyfriend's favourite game of that year. And this is also why for many, a video game being adapted into another medium like a film or a book inspires fear rather than excitement, because to suggest that the story people already love thanks to the medium they viewed it on is going to have a seamless transition without losing some aspect of what made it so notable and intimate with its audience is immediately going to lead to some doubts on if it can even work to begin with. Or as I like to call it, why the demo movie has a very high chance of not being very good. This is a weirdly common demand from gamers, but I regret to inform you that if you enjoy something, that doesn't mean it's immediately worthy of a film adaptation, let alone one that's good. That's why Demo is one of the best rhythm games ever made, because it's not like there's some secret facet of the game's mechanics or writing I've been holding from you guys that actually makes it amazing when looked at categorically. It's because holistically, in its whole, Demo is one of the most cohesive and impactful games the genre has ever had through its world and sound design, and that makes the rhythm gameplay and themes better and more cathartic because of that impact. That's why Pathologic has such a passionate cult following, because for those who don't know, Pathologic is an RPG that is categorically fucking horrible in every single way, with gameplay that was deliberately designed poorly to make the player bored and miserable. But all of that horribleness directly contributes to immersing the player in a fascinating world, where everybody is dying of plague and you can't do shit about it without making difficult decisions that will inevitably harm others or sacrifice life and limb. Holism is what makes Tetris Effect the best Tetris game, because of its audio and visual feedback to create a narrative about the wonders of the world we live in, and the accomplishments of mankind to give every falling Tetramino that soul we all crave. And Holism is what sets a platformer like Celeste distinctly from a platformer like Super Mario Maker. One is categorically a limitless package of custom levels that challenge your raw platforming skills, and the other is holistically in the top 5 of the greatest video games ever made, because Celeste has not just tight gameplay and challenging level design in of itself, and it doesn't just tell the story of a young girl's journey with her mental health, and it doesn't just blow the whistle on the conspiracy theory that trans people can double jump, but the player's own mechanical and skill progression directly parallels the emotional journey the main protagonist is taken on, like in the game's final act where the player is given an extremely useful power-up at the exact moment in the narrative where the protagonist triumphs over their personal obstacles, making you bond further with its cast and thus making the game more satisfying, rewarding, and above all, memorable. It's not critically acclaimed just because the gameplay and story are both separately good items that would work on their own, or that fans of the game made exceptions for the gameplay just because the story was good. It's because everything teamed up and merged into one good thing. And the main reason Holism is important to me is because it adds more substance and purpose to the work at its core. If you want to solve a half-decade-old mystery about my rhythm game taste, this holistic outlook is why I also don't really care for custom charts in rhythm games compared to other moddable content, like engine total conversions that create entirely new games. I don't even care when a rhythm game has DLC and the extent of that DLC is just new songs that don't truly add anything to the core game itself, like a new story scenario or new game mechanics. If anything, I actually don't like it when rhythm games have too many songs, because a rhythm game can use restraint and a limited song count to have the most heartfelt and handpicked setlist that feels like it was created to absorb the player in the world and themes of the title. And there's something that feels kind of hollow and lacking in substance about cramming that game with so much extra content of random genres and artists that you can't guarantee that every player will experience the same creative vision. Hey dude! I saw you finish Demo. Wasn't it just amazing when you played Myosotis after the end credits? It's a really impactful piece that was meant to be played while you're feeling emotional from the revelations of the story, and it thematically ties with another prior song from the game. It's easily one of the best and most iconic ending sequences ever made in a video game. What? Nah, I haven't touched Myosotis. I didn't like how the preview sounded when I unlocked it, so I just played the Taiko no Tatsujin crossover songs. Taiko no Tatsujin? People died, Craig! Categorically, games that predicate themselves on their custom or additional beat maps, like OS, Beat Saber, and Project DIVA's edit mode, can in theory give me hundreds of hours worth of high-speed charts that challenge my reflexes and burn some calories, but what is that meaningfully adding to the whole of the game and its creative identity? What new visions is it allowing to exist beyond elongating what I've already seen before in a contextless vacuum? And if it's that contextless, how the hell is it fun? You wouldn't make Persona DLC DLC where you just tack on 10 new dungeons that add nothing to the journey and the player's mechanical progression, and I like to think I hold that same standard to the rhythm game. This isn't to say rhythm games aren't allowed to do that. Hell, I simp for Just Dance, and that series drops new songs like every 6 months, but I'm just saying that it's not the only qualifier of a good rhythm game, and that in a lot of cases, it can do more harm than good. Sometimes, a smaller song list, a more focused thematic direction, and things to do in the game other than rhythm just make your rhythm game better. Why must I sink hours into games like Arse and Beat Saber that provide very little beyond having infinite content, when instead I could be very, very excited for a structured game like Unbeatable? Unbeatable is an upcoming rhythm adventure game that wears Holism like a badge of honor, and if the final release of the game holds up to what it promises, it might just be on Demo's level with representing my ideal format of rhythm game design. It's going to have an open world, mini-games, NPCs, quests, a completely original soundtrack composed for the game where every individual song has some thematic association to its story and characters, and its very premise contextualizes the gameplay back to the player. You play a singer starting a band in a world where music is illegal, and the charts you're playing is the band's line of defense, where you fight off enemy reinforcements as you perform. One of the charts in the demo even has a really standout moment where it urgently and repeatedly pans the camera back and forth while the amplifier screams out, conveying a sense of tension and uneasiness that the protagonist should be feeling in that situation. It's not just mechanics and charts and content. It has a creative vision that taps into the hyper-emotional, rebellious spirit that the very medium of music built itself upon. And that, right there, is the encompassing ethos of what makes this genre so cathartic and irresistible. If you can't tell, I sincerely hope this game is amazing when it releases, and I just wanted to give it at least a passing mention in one of my videos. I also think this holistic perspective on the genre is important because it challenges the idea that longevity is the #1 high point all rhythm games should strive for. One could say, yeah, games like Project DIVA F2 are great and all, but there's nothing to do afterwards when you pass all of their songs. And to that I say, yeah? Then you just stop playing when you're done. How does that make it worse? I'd much rather replay the same 30 songs over and over long term than play a rhythm game with 300 songs if the game with 30 songs is just better at providing more as a holistic experience. The rhythm game with 30 songs probably has more replay value, and who even said that a good game requires you to be constantly glued to it until you reach burnout? Wouldn't you rather finish something while you're satisfied so you have nothing but fond memories looking back on it, rather than having your taste in media entirely determined by long-term consumerism? I, for one, cannot think of a single game I've passionately loved where I've also felt motivated to do a second playthrough within the very same year, because not all video games are designed to keep you glued to them for as long as possible, and failure to do so, I can't see as an indictment on the game's merits. If your first thought when you see a single-player game is dead game, you're a meme and everybody is laughing at you. But old bitterness aside, holistic critique is a very fascinating framework with which to assess games, as it encourages us to look beyond a series of cold and calculated qualifiers, like whether or not a game functions as a good product in the marketplace to keep us invested for hours on end. And it instead asks us to explore why exactly the specific games we play invoke these specific emotions in us, and what kinds of games we want to look forward to in the future. But it's after this whole excitable talk here that I need to return to Project SEKAI so we can begin the overall thesis of how I feel about this game. Project SEKAI is a fine game. There's nothing that's actually wrong with it to the extent of being literally unplayable or offensive. However, due to its structure and what little it demands from the player, it unfortunately starts to lose its spark as you continue to play it. Because assessing not categorically but holistically, SEKAI is one of the weakest and most uninspired rhythm games you can actually play, to the point of where I can't see myself giving it as much as a single tap as soon as this video is complete. Funnily enough, in order to further understand where Sekai begins to fall off as a rhythm game, we first need to go over the lacking elements of its story. It's here that we'd usually be going straight into things like writing, characterization, plot execution, payoff, arcs, the complete lack thereof, etc. But the issue with that is it completely glosses over the bigger issue with Sekai's story, and that's its implementation into the game's structure. I don't want to dedicate any significant time to Sekai's literal writing, because that's not its biggest issue. I could stand here before you right now and say that Sekai's writing is either good or bad, because sometimes it's down to earth and wholesome, and sometimes it's drop dead fucking boring and problematic. But no matter the writing's quality, Sekai still wouldn't be a good story by the standards of a video game due to the lack of structural incorporation with the rhythm gameplay. In other words, the lack of a ludonarrative motivator. So what do I mean by that? Well, firstly, let's fill in a glossary, because I just flooded your brain with a bunch of nerd shit. Ludology is the study of video games, as well as studying the act of playing them and the culture surrounding them. And ludonarrative describes narratives done through the medium of video games, regardless of if it's done through conventional means like text or cutscenes. An example of unconventional ludonarrative, well, you'd have games like Unpacking, a Zen puzzle game where you unpack storage containers in different locations. You can easily glean each location as the progression of childhood to adulthood, and the core of the game's storytelling is not through text or cutscenes, but instead interpreting the traits of the protagonist based on what specific items you take out of the box. Stuff like moving to a college dorm room and among all the textbooks and utilities, noticing that you still brought your old stuffed animals with you. Does this mean we're very sentimental? Or maybe that we aren't quite ready to move on to adulthood? Regardless of what your takeaway is, it's a takeaway brought purely from interactivity. But to further elaborate, let me introduce you to some Canadian philosopher who we mostly cite in video essays because he made a useful form of media theory back in the 1960s. Marshall McLuhan. Incorporating quotes and sayings by the man in question is referred to as McLuhanism, which we will be applying to our assessment of Sekai alongside holistic critique. For those unaware, McLuhan was basically one of the big boys of media studies, mostly because of this saying: the medium is the message. This proposes that a work's means of communication is what should be primarily focused on in discourse, not just the message that medium is carrying, because otherwise the contents of the text blind us to the characteristics that each medium can provide. In a simplified way that applies to video games, you can't 100% evaluate a story in a game purely by the words that appear on screen. You also need to account for the other aspects of a game's storytelling, such as what the player is doing and the role they play in the narrative, because the video game's nature as a video game has influence on how the story is being told and if the player will even be interested in finding out more. It's kind of like being a dungeon master. You have to let your players randomly walk off to have sex with the first NPC they find, because otherwise they might not bother escorting the actually lore-relevant character you spent 2 months writing backstory for if they don't receive a sense of personal agency. The honest-to-God best and most exciting part of Sekai was the introduction, where Hatsune Miku speaks directly to the player, instructs them to help her sing, and sets them off on a journey to explore the Sekai of many different groups of people. The reason this aspect of the plot works is because the player is being directly instructed to do something that is going to have a tangible effect on the universe of the game, and is given an objective they need to follow in order to make that impact. And this anticipation then carries into the intro of whichever unit you pick first, because the opening with Miku sets the tone that you've been sent to some unknown part of your world in order to watch over someone and get to know them. It paints the atmosphere that you will have a hand in the growth of these characters, connect with them on an intimate level, and then perform alongside them through the means of the glass wall between you. In video games, providing a feeling of interactivity doesn't just come from the player making inputs. It comes from the universe of the game contextualizing how it as a world reacts to those inputs. And this takes many forms in many different games, regardless of how deep and complex the story may actually be. In Super Mario Bros., the player is platforming in order to navigate towards the castle to kick a big turtle's ass and save a damsel. In The Legend of Zelda, the player is exploring dungeons to get the equipment needed to kick a wizard's ass and save a damsel. You can even apply this to Ace Attorney and other notable highlights in the visual novel genre, because the player is the one collecting the evidence to choose to present in court, to kick a murder suspect's ass and prevent a damsel from going on death row, while also flirting with the opposition. That one's the best part. And the player doesn't even need to be the spotlit protagonist who's holding all the cards in order to have agency. Games like Pathologic, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, and the recently released Elden Ring are games that kind of hate the player. They don't see the player character as anything particularly significant, and their identity is rendered by powerlessness, but that doesn't mean the player can't do anything meaningful with that powerlessness. Instead, the universe of these games continue to react and progress as the player evolves, making each decision and triumph feel all the more earned, even if it was a scripted and inevitable sequence the developers planned in advance. Pathologic even has a playable character who has a series of privileges and advantages, and all that gets him is an entire town of diseased Russians that love to bully him. Man, I love Pathologic. I'd love to play it someday. And this principle applies to rhythm games as well, but because of how bizarre and contextless rhythm gameplay is compared to something like running, shooting, or talking, the genre needs a bit more legwork to really make it shine. If you have any semblance of a storyline, narrative universe, or just characterization in your rhythm game, your rhythm mechanics need to be contextualized with regards to how exactly they're affecting the universe of the game and progressing it. You can only get away with your mechanics having no context if you're literally just making an arcade rhythm game that has no narrative, universe, or characters to speak of. But as Sekai and vocal synth games at large are not that, it requires the former. Even something as simple as you being a musician playing an instrument live on stage to hundreds of people, or more appropriately, you are operating a virtual singer and need to help them sing by pressing buttons so their voice doesn't cut out. Because otherwise there is no point to the gameplay. There is no impact or catharsis, meaning the player may as well not be doing anything. And this is Sekai's hugest game-ruining deal-breaker issue. All your gameplay does in Project Sekai is farm for XP, a point system that has zero functional place in the narrative, so you can then passively read a bunch of non-interactive visual novels in your own time. Said visual novels do provide in-game currency, so there is a surface-level reward incentive, but it's very apparent that nothing in the story is a part of the literal game, which is the true incentive a game needs in order for its story to work. It's the step one, it's preheating your oven, it's the most rudimentary approach to writing for a video game.
Hey, how you doing? This is Early Morning Joey in the editing room in his gym jams. I want to quickly read aloud some dialogue that I just remembered existed when I was capturing footage. Looks like we have a new Sekai. From here, neither you nor I will be able to do much except watch over them. But I just know they'll find their true feelings one day. All of us will be out there helping them too. Like, in my mind, there's something that's just, in a ludology sense, completely broken about saying we have no choice but to watch over them, but me, the fictional character who's not actually interacting with the work, I'm going to have influence. I think that's the point where you realize that you've not made something engaging for your players and you just have to throw the whole thing out and start again.
Like, I could spend all day dogpiling on Genshin Impact, known better by its official name, Destiny for White People. How the gacha rates suck ass, how character progression is grindy, how the combat is mindless, how the male characters look like they were all designed in pit crew, how the game would straight up improve if it was just a complete offline game with every chapter finished up front in one go, and how I have at least 150 hours put into it and I can't stop as much as I would like to because an addictive loop is literally all this game has.
Third time's the charm. It's something! What did I get? It's just a very nice sword! It's just a very nice sword, guys.
But it, at the very least, has a gameplay loop contextualized as the player avatar actively doing duties that benefit humanity at large and bring them one step closer to an emotionally driven goal, meaning there's a drive to it beyond gambling and staring at Ito's AA cup. Y'all, can I be real for a sec? You have extremely bad taste in men. The main story in Sekai is a prequel arc that shows how all the units came together, but the rhythm game, as in all the songs and MVs that are added over time, take place after the events of those stories. So the main cast and the player are effectively on different sections of the game's timeline when you're just starting out, making it impossible for the player to feel like they are the ones progressing the characters, that they're sharing any experiences with them, or even that the characters will be able to have permanent instances of growth or change that will affect the player's emotional state as they play. This doesn't feel like I'm helping Hatsune Miku and helping others with the power of music. It's not channeling any emotionality or rebellion. It feels like Hatsune Miku has asked me to sit in the corner and jingle baby keys in front of my face. And if I jingle the keys for just long enough, I can go into the living room and watch a keynote presentation on all the people Miku helped while I was too busy being a dumb baby. This makes me as a player feel like an afterthought. Nothing I do is going to be satisfying or climactic because everything has already happened without me needing to be there. Something especially compounded by the game's story being told through a continuous live service through its seasonal events and updates, meaning the game doesn't progress on my terms, it progresses on the publisher's terms. The characters are doing fine, regardless of if I play, so I may as well not play today. Hell, I don't even have to play tomorrow. I could just uninstall this game and I as a player won't miss out on anything worthwhile because it's apparent that everyone's doing fine. Even her. Contrast this with Project DIVA X, a game that immediately starts with the central conflict that there is no light or music in the world and everything is awful now. The world is literally cold and hard because nobody has been around to switch the game on until you booted it up just recently, and that makes playing its charts and collecting costumes all the more sick because, well, you're helping. Sekai not only damages its story as you can't motivate yourself to care about what are effectively a group of strangers with awful social skills that you're eavesdropping on for 2 hours, but it also damages the gameplay. It makes the game down to a raw mechanical level more boring to play because of how the game is written. It makes it pack less of a punch, and any sense of drama, intensity, action, or emotion is completely dried up after the first couple of ranks. Music is an emotional medium, and the core of rhythm games is sucking the player into those emotions so they can feel every heart-wrenching chord as they hammer away at their controller. But Sekai has deliberately taken every measure possible to tell you that you don't matter, and you're just here to sit and watch like a good boy, which might just be the quickest possible way to lose the interest of anyone who is remotely passionate about rhythm games or music in general. I will keep saying this until the day I die. There's a reason Guitar Hero used to be one of the most lucrative rhythm games ever made, and that's not because of its soundtrack or its funky-ass controller. It's because when you provide a rockstar power fantasy that lets people pretend they're up on stage being good at music, the general audience laps that shit up, and that speaks volumes about the ludology of immersive rhythm games. There's even an event that happens in all the unit stories where the leader discovers their true feelings, and those true feelings take the form of a song that you can actually play in the rhythm game. But this gameplay doesn't actually happen in the story. Story progression doesn't lock out any songs, so you can easily play these tracks the moment you install the game with no prior context on who anyone is, and the songs don't automatically come up as set pieces as you read the visual novel either, so you just stare at the screen while the instrumental plays in the background. I'm sat in the corner, tapping at notes in my own time, effectively doing chores, and the reward is getting to watch the entire cast of the game I'm playing have fun without me. Your existence in Project Sekai is not as the hero, the manager, or the performer. It's as a fanboy, and your main goal is to form a distant parasocial relationship with everyone, making it impossible to meaningfully connect with these characters, as oh so relatable as they may be. Here's something fun. I did not care for the Leonid song Needle when I started playing the game and blindly going through songs for free crystals, but as soon as I finished reading Leonid's story with all the characterization in my mind and the context that this song was born from Ichika's true feelings, the song and the chart were infinitely more cathartic and satisfying to play and listen to. And I didn't even like reading Leonid's story. It's incredibly drab, lacking in any personality. The hidden feelings at the end were you like your friends, which literally was not in dispute since the start of this thing, and the best outcome this story could have had was just all four members, especially Saki, realizing that they'd be happier if they just got better friends. But it just took this one song to demonstrate how even the most miserable of writing can be almost rescued, and I mean almost, with just a few pieces of ludonarrative to make the player feel like an actor on the stage, a contributor to the events at play, rather than just a member of the audience. Because that's the entire point of what a video game is, and a video game is the medium that Project Sekai chose for its message. Not a book, not an anime, a video game. And this is why Project DIVA X actually has a better story than Sekai. As a plot to read, Project DIVA X is hardly anything special as there's very little characterization or arcs to speak of. Pacing is all over the goddamn place. This was from an era where Sega would piss and shit themselves if Hatsune Miku was seen in public with a personality, and Sekai goes over far more explicit and important subject matter, with regards to the creative process, mental health, home life, identity expression, and such. But the immediate storytelling in X is still significantly more engaging, resonating, and better written as there's an immediate conflict that the characters have reacted to, and the player's progression actively helps the characters in their journey from beginning to end. Something dawned on me when eyeing up the array of Sekai discourse on social media, which is that Sekai's storytelling is still perceived as invaluable because, rightly so, it's a game that was written about the producers, not the virtual singers. Sekai aimed to tell an anthology based on dozens of life experiences and instances of growth that creatives go through on their journey to discover themselves. It's ultimately a step in the right direction to truly hone in on the bullet points of what makes V-synth culture so enchanting, even if the experiences that fuel it aren't too glamorous. This theming is even something I've brought up before about Project DIVA. The game derives many of its creative decisions from classic and mimetic aspects of vocal synth culture, and the structure of the virtual world in Project DIVA X with its themed clouds exists to illustrate the many creative identities this facet of music encapsulates beyond cute anime girl who screams, to the point of where the moment you witness a song or an MV in DIVA that steps into any remotely unsettling unsettling direction, it really sticks with you like a tremor in your bones. Sekai even does a series of momentous strides in terms of vocal synth representation by commissioning dozens of producers like Suri, Police Piccadilly, and Neru to make songs specifically written for the game, and you can even play songs containing vocalists beyond just the Kryptons, with vocal appearances by Flower, VY2, Otomachi Yuna, Kayuki, and more. If there's one thing the community love, it's more of their culture being represented. The only reason people like Project Mirai is because Gumi is in it after all. But where it falls flat for me is that in Project DIVA, the thematic ties are an enrichment of the game. They elevate the sense of scale and emotional value of the journey the player's being immediately taken on, which is already enthralling in of itself thanks to its mechanical design and holistic structure. PDX feels like a tale also made about the producers, and we're a part of it, because as a video game, interactivity was PDX's most effective way to walk you through those themes. F and F Second didn't even have stories in them. They were just arcade-style games structurally, but their art and MV direction still provided a bountiful anthology that felt akin to walking through the most magical of interactive art galleries. But in a game as half-baked, segmented, and lacking in personality as Sekai, being a game in honor of the producers kinda feels like the justification as to why it exists, rather than an enrichment of an already resonating title. It feels like a dodge that determines the game is required to exist, rather than actively striving to provide something substantial. The game has a lot of commissioned songs to close out event stories that in a holistically designed rhythm game would be crowning climactic sequences, where the player jams along in a moment of triumph these close friends are sharing, the sequence acting as the player's reward for the commitment and kindness they showed throughout the gameplay. But instead it's kinda like this. Sekai is literally this meme in video game form, and that's why the writing doesn't feel enjoyable. Nothing weaves together as a singular work, but it's instead a mishmash of separate materials and ideas that are lacking in any sense of drive or cohesion, so people still sign in for their login bonuses. A game like Project DIVA argues that the medium is the message, while a game like Sekai argues that only the message matters and fuck the medium, which is not a sentiment I can vibe with at all if media theory dictates that it makes your message weaker anyway. Goddamn, Canadian philosophers hate him. Gacha games have discovered a new way to write completely uncompelling narratives. When your best response to criticism of Sekai is that it was a game made to give back to its community, all it suggests to me is it's using the labor of other creatives as a crutch for its shortcomings rather than it just being a well-made work of art. Because Project DIVA X had a narrative that was actually written for a video game, rather than just being a compilation of verbal diarrhea dumped alongside mechanics that don't have to do with anything. And if your retort to that is, it's a mobile game, it's not that deep, well, you're right, it isn't. So in that case, why are we elevating it as anything higher than that when we proceed to tout it as the vocal synth community's salvation, you know? Why are we suggesting it has a significant amount of merit when it fails to surpass one of the most basic qualifiers of a video game? Is it meaningless and stupid or not? I want you to pick a lane, because what makes you think the most helpful thing for a video game is to just be reductive of what it's qualified to do? Surely the pendulum swings both ways if the game is so insignificant that I'm somehow not allowed to think in detail about why exactly this game felt disappointing. And like I said before, this isn't something you can just shrug off and just base the game on how fun it is, because this lack of contextualization can also take a hit on the gameplay mechanics, presentation, and entertainment value. A simple and common thread when it comes to well-made rhythm games is they all provide a musical context with which to direct their mechanics, the most straightforward ones simply being the actor playing instruments or performing. Rock Band, DJ Hero, Demo, Taiko no Tatsujin, even a game like Just Dance does this to an extent, and the process of learning the choreography so that you can sync up with these glittery MVs brings forth its own emotional response. But here's the thing, band geeks, that doesn't necessarily mean the player needs to engage in a one-on-one simulation for rhythm games to work. Project DIVA has the player follow the vocals, but by pressing buttons. Audica and Beat Saber follow general rhythms in their music rather than being single rolls, but still portray themselves as the player being engaged in some form of obstacle combat. A fictional context can also be applied to the story and world to add an extra edge to a game's interactivity. In Demo, playing piano is growing the tree that Demo has been tasked to nurture to progress the story. In Project DIVA X, helping the vocalist sing is producing voltage, which is restoring light and happiness to the virtual world. And most instrument-based games like Taiko are pretty much just the player player performing the music so everyone else can join in on the fun. So you don't even need to be that intricate about it. It kinda speaks volumes about what makes a game like Guitar Hero so memorable, when one of the most commonly retained experiences from its player base was not the charting or the game's length, but that time you were having a drunk night with your friends and you all got booed off by the game because your fingerwork was a little bit too clunky. This is a dynamic that Sekai almost reaches for, but doesn't stick with enough to make the game engaging long term, both thematically and mechanically. For the most part, Sekai's charting sticks to vocals, but as the difficulty increases, it becomes significantly more preoccupied with overcharting to the backing music and drumming along to a general rhythm, and this combined with the lack of involvement the player has with the world of the game means the charts eventually start to feel lifeless, derivative, and lacking in any sense of emotional catharsis. Playing Sekai doesn't really feel like any sort of contribution, dance, performance, or means of assistance. It's just contextless drumming that starts to get boring no matter how many songs get patched in, and no matter how hard the game could possibly get. But this isn't just caused by a broader context with the story and world, but also by a lack of minute context behind each individual mechanic in the game. The most standout of rhythm games present each individual note and input as a function that is used contextually with the music. The likes of Guitar Hero and Demo take advantage of being instrument-based rhythm games by charting themselves in similar vein to the song's own notation, such as sending 2 notes down whenever there's a chord. DJ Hero uses real mixing functions, like soundboard effects, crossfades, and scratches as its note types, and when used, the remix you selected has that exact same mixing effect play as you input. And even in a game like Voice, where there's no narrative context behind any of the mechanics at play, each note is still given some musical significance, like sliders representing softer notes, holds representing glides, and swipes representing strength and momentum. And in the modern console-era Project DIVA games, the good ones anyway, each note has a musical context with which to be applied to, and they follow a very basic sequence. When the song behaves differently in tone, the chart behaves differently in intensity, and when the chart behaves differently, so should the player. The function of a rhythm game chart is to be the interactive middleman that allows the player and the music to tonally communicate. In DIVA, taps are for basic notes and holds are for sustains, but on top of that you have doubles, where you press a button and a direction at the same time for stronger, more climactic notes like shouts and staccatos, stars, where you flick the analog stick for instrumental breaks and sound effects, and rush notes, where the singer belts an extremely powerful sustain, and in response the player must spam the button as much as possible to make the note burst with a loud impact. And it's contextual inputs like these that allow every facet of each chart to have a feeling of purpose that connects the player and the performer to make the gameplay more empowering, emotionally charged, and just plainly more fun. One of the many general approaches to take with rhythm game charts is not to see them as levels, maps, or challenges necessarily, but rather an interactive layer of music. I, for one, love the rhythm game genre because I interpret it as the natural progression of listening to music, where the emotions the player is taken through as they play elevates their listening experience and allows them to connect with songs in a whole new way. As an example, listening to Clockwork Clown on its own, insanely good. Playing the F-second extreme chart to Clockwork Clown and landing the chance time at the final chorus, I am bawling my fucking eyes out and loving every second of it, because F-second is unironically a perfect 10 out of 10 monumental hallmark of game design. And this doesn't mean video games can't be fun without excessive amounts of analysis on what each input thematically relates to. No way am I saying you need to be unhinged like me to start having fun with rhythm games, but Jesus, could you imagine? But I'm saying that video games are a complicated psychosomatic medium where dozens of factors affecting body and mind can have an unconscious impact on your level of engagement, where so much as a sound effect or a flash on the screen can determine whether or not a mechanic in a game is fun. Like, it's pretty much common knowledge that in a lot of modern PvE shooters, spraying bullets at a big beastie is okay in of itself, but once you slap on damage numbers to flood the screen with, a player is significantly more likely to feel superfluously rewarded for spraying those bullets. I've heard anecdotes from game developers who call their department into the meeting room, sit everyone down, and then ask, "Hey, guys, so this gun, does it sound crunchy enough?" Ever played a class-based shooter and wondered why your entire team picked DPS? It's most likely because when you play as the thing that kills frequently, the funny pop-up comes up that tickles your brain with the happy chemicals, something you don't really get when you play as a healer. Or for one of my personal favourite instances of audio feedback, I know we like to dunk on Bioshock Infinite for being, well, Bioshock Infinite, but someone on the team made the fantastic conscious decision to slam their hands down on a piano and make that the sound effect that plays whenever you get a melee kill. A sound that both adds dramatic emphasis to each kill you get, but also unsettles the player, making each kill seem far more grotesque than expected. You don't need to be consciously aware of something in a game for it to affect you. Hell, everything I write in this video primarily stems from personal interpretation of my own reactions, and there's probably so many other fascinating elements of game design I haven't accounted for, and may never do so because it's that expansive, and it'd be incredibly reductive and overly simplified to suggest that raw gameplay mechanics are the only things that affect my cold husk of a heart. But back to the charting in Sekai. The game has taps, holds, and omnidirectional swipes, which could be used to apply some musical context to improve the game's charts, but there's no kind of consistent musical rule set that's strongly adhered to, because there's so few note types that the game still needs to keep the variety and difficulty going. In both Expert and Master, holds and swipes are used seemingly at random. The most inconspicuous of musical flares that are delivered with a tap note at one point could later on repeat themselves with holds and swipes, leading to a charting philosophy that is much more content with challenge, score chasing, and unpredictability rather than immersion or musical catharsis, making it lack in any substance and severely reducing the game's longevity and memorability. You almost start to autopilot the game a bit, because there isn't that sense of excitement that makes you want to bop along. You may as well be playing the game muted at this rate, and I kinda do at this point when I'm in a public area without headphones and I still want to grind for event points. This is the reason I critique the arcade DIVA games like Future Tone and Megamix so harshly, because the multi-notes, arcade holds, and sliders are incorporated into the game's charts with barely any kinetic approach to how the player interacts with the music. Just about any note in a song could be any one of arcade's note types, leading to a cold and monotonous gameplay style that hardly reacts back to the player. People talk a big talk about Arcade DIVA being the series at its hardest, but what's the point in that hard difficulty if it's so drab that you're not going to be conscious through any of it? Unlike the F games and PDX, Arcade DIVA was not made with music or a feeling of performance in mind. Its mechanics only exist to make a hard game for you to make extreme perfect videos for, and that's why it's the weakest one in the series. Sekai could have very easily implemented more note types with the systems available. For example, its very own rush note where the player mashes the screen as fast as they can, or a double note that has a louder hit sound when tapped with 2 fingers, or it could just have multiple swipe notes where the player is required to swipe in a specific direction to direct the player's choreography. And I'm not saying a rhythm game is better the more note types it has. Demo's sound design makes for an exceptional game feel, and that game only has taps and sliders. But when designing a rhythm game, you want to add elements of varying intensities and textures to connect the player with the song so they behave differently to unique pieces of music. And even then, we don't even need to go into fancy terms like holism, contextualization, and game feel for me to have a problem with Sekai's charts. I will praise Sekai till the end of time for making a thumb-friendly rhythm game. I still appreciate it that much because not everyone wants to sweat over the iPad to have a good time, but on the other hand, fellas, we need to talk about the formatting and note choices you've done here. Sekai has what I call a hold fetish, probably one of the worst things you can do in a rhythm game. There are holds everywhere when a song really does not need them, and all it does is make the player's inputs less dense, making the chart more boring to play. Hold notes are a tricky note type to introduce to your Touch V scroller well, because they're a standard means of contextualizing trills and sustains in music, and they double as a way to simplify a rapid series of notes so your chart is more equally balanced throughout its runtime. So they are a necessity, but you still need to be relatively scarce with them, as the player will only be doing one of two things throughout the duration of a hold note. One, they will be doing intricate tracking and positioning, which is an action but not a rhythmic action, or two, they will be doing literally fucking nothing and just holding their finger in place. When Sekai's charts have a hold, it's often toggling between these two states during a sequence that could have very easily had more tap notes while still maintaining the ideal difficulty the chart is aiming for. It's especially apparent when you play on tablet, because the whole appeal of playing a V-scroller on a large display is it's supposed to feel like you're playing a keyboard, jumping back and forth between different positions on screen and playing along to the intricacies of melody and rhythm. But for most of Sekai, the game is much more content to have you either drunkenly swinging your fingers around the screen back and forth in a swerving haze that gets tiring after no time at all, or it spams triplets when nothing in the song asks for triplets because they don't have any other means to make calmer songs more fun. I have a very basic rule on how I rate rhythm game charting. If you made a rhythm game where you need to play the hardest and fastest charts just to have fun, where you don't get anything satisfying out of winding down with the easier and slower songs, you've not made a good rhythm game. And it especially starts to get monotonous due to the lack of differing patterns the charts have. The most common type of chart you'll get is alternately drumming the melody line on either side, drumming the melody on one side while you follow the beat on the other, or if you're feeling particularly spicy, drumming the melody line on both sides at the same time. Fucking watch out, y'all. The charts begin to gradually merge in your mind to the point where there's nothing particularly stand out about each one, except sometimes they have those really thin hold notes that are really fucking annoying. This is partially from a lack of versatile mechanics to make more interesting patterns, but it also just comes from how cramped and gridlocked the playing area is. No matter what device you play on, barely any of the screen is taken up by the lane, and notes are grid snapped into these predefined slots that have a lot of distance between each other. So not only can you not get notes that freeform to make readability more unpredictable and interesting, but you never run into any unique input scenarios, like both of your thumbs needing to move to the right-hand side of the screen to manage a flurry of notes that are too plentiful for one thumb to handle. This is why, despite all of its extremely noticeable flaws, even by my standards, and being long since forgotten by the rhythm game community, I still regard Voice as one of the more interesting and ambitious touch V-scrollers in the genre, because despite being a basic arcadey rhythm game with very little story cohesion, its strongest charts are still completely enchanting. And this is even when you exclude the fact that Voice's charts are uniquely animated with each song, although that does bump it up by a significant amount of points. Animated charts should just be the V-scroller standard at this point, I'm not even kidding. In the special difficulty of To Next Page by Kamo Misano, the verses are charted to simulate playing the piano in the center with odd flares off to the side whenever the percussion and strings chime in, until the chorus hits and the stage presents itself with two distinct halves. On one side, you need to play the piano, while on the other side, you need to keep up with the amen break that kicked in. In this chart, the game is not inspired by a singular role or instrument, but it still taps into the unique traits of each song that are present in the literal audio file, rather than the charter just pulling out their own made-up pattern. And this higher input density at this very moment just surges with energy and enthusiasm to make a truly memorable V-scroller chart, and it's not even a fast-paced or challenging one. Hell, Voice even has a hold fetish chart that's executed in a clever way. Alice Music by Alice Shach is a song that on special does not have any tap notes, only sliders and holds, but contextually it's fantastic, because Alice Music is a folk song with a lot of soft instruments and vocals that have your fingers glide rhythmically across the screen, like you're gently striking the instruments, and when the chorus ramps up, it conveys a festival-like tone, like you're conducting a marching band, casting the player as the driving force of the music's energy and enthusiasm. Seriously, I have a lot of problems with Voice, but I cite it so frequently and associate it with my branding because it still showed some amazing ideas that I firmly believe the rest of the genre should incorporate. It's the only V-scroller that's able to chart future bass properly, and that's immediate marks for me. Sekai is just a very unremarkable rhythm game as soon as you start comparing it to other V-scrollers on the market. It kinda just gets the job done so the player has something to tap the screen nonsensically to, but it never goes beyond that to the point where, yeah, it gets boring very quickly. It's like Arcade Diva, where there's not necessarily anything to complain about that's functionally wrong, but the quality of a game goes so much further than whether or not it functions. It's not a good compliment to its setlist, and it just dampens the impact these tracks could have made in a more cohesive title. But now that we mention the setlist... you've been waiting for this bit, haven't you? Arguably, Project Sekai's biggest attraction is the Sekai covers. In-game, a large portion of the tracks have two main versions the player can toggle between as they play. The Virtual Singer version, which is the original Vocaloid song in its purest form by its original producer, while the Sekai version is a whole new cover that was made in-house. I'm choking on my spit. The idea behind the in-house covers is they take vocal synth works, both songs from Days of Old and songs commissioned for the game, and adapt them into group numbers featuring both the Peer Pro virtual singers and vocal performances by the voice actors of the original characters. But first thing I want to establish is how lightly I wish to tread in my critique of these covers as it pertains to who the critique is for. Assessing the Sekai versions is a tricky subject as it can be mistaken for criticizing the singing abilities of the game's voice talent, which I have zero interest in doing. This is a human voice cast performance performing an immense library of music that wasn't originally composed with human vocalists in mind, and they presumably have to perform all of it in character and within a strict development deadline. Lord knows I can do all that shit, and if someone told me on social media that my voice sounded awful, well, firstly, they already do that, but even then, there's not much I can really do about it, can I? Any and all problems I have with the in-house covers pertain more to fixable or replaceable aspects of the production process that the voice actors had very little involvement in, like vocal synth tech, post-production, vocal direction, line distribution, and which VAs are in which units. Because a project on this scale is worked on by dozens of people in many different positions. A general rule of thumb in just about all pre-produced media is that it's presumptuous to pin just about anything on the actors straight away, because there was at least one person of a higher authority who listened to their performance and sanctioned what was provided with no further feedback. So if I say something like, the characters Tsukasa and Akito sound like they're constantly out of breath and deep-throating a sock, that does not in any way equate to me saying that the actors Daisuke Hirose and Fumiya Imai have no talent, because, well, that's not what I said, is it? The in-house covers are interesting, but let me first go over what I like. One easy win for me is the existence of the covers allows the soundtrack to be more diegetic with the game's world. Diegesis is basically a media term that pertains to the distinction of whether or not an aspect of media takes place within the universe its characters exist in. So, for example, if a character walks into a scene, a song is playing on the radio, and they acknowledge that a song is playing on the radio, that makes the music of the scene diegetic. The music exists in the universe, rather than only existing to the viewer. While non-diegetic audio has utility in conveying things emotionally to the audience without communicating the same sentiment to the characters, diegetic audio provides a more intimate way of delivering things, like character motivations. Having the characters that have been present in the plot actively engaging in the setlist of the game adds an additional layer to the soundtrack's thematic significance. One of the most memorable moments for me is Kanade Mafuyu's performance of Jisho Mushoku, a song about wishing the world cared about you less so you could disappear without a trace. This is not only a pertinent theme in the group's main story that the characters learn to open up about, but it also allows you to be taught about the characters just by playing the rhythm game on its own. And on top of that, I think tonally some of the songs lend themselves incredibly well to the crowded, shouty idol vibes that idol gachas like to bring to their music. One of the best Sekai versions is easily For Becoming Potatoes, a song that falls under the unit Wonderland Showtime, because the whole idea of Wonderlands as a unit is they're the kooky theatrical amusement park actors, and the theatrics elevate the song to a cabaret funhouse style. And Jisho Mushoku feels so well made because Nightcord are the socially reclusive producers who perform in a pale, empty version of the Sekai, and the cover has such a clean, choir quality to it that it makes the surroundings all the more haunting and tranquil. I also really admire the vocals from a lot of the voice talent being shown off in this game. If there's one point I want to reiterate over and over for you all to keep in mind after watching this video, it's that I think the VAs are all great singers with the right material and direction. And when you hear the VAs in covers where they're just singing on their own without having to force the vocal traits of their role in Sekai, they are absolutely phenomenal. Hinata Sato as Mizuki, Tomomi and Asumi as An, Shunichi Toki as Rui, and Rina Hanizumi as Shizuku are easily four of the most stunning vocalists in the game, and I can't think of a single performance in-game from any of these actors that I disliked, because their voices feel pleasing while also bursting with unique characterization that makes their performances stand out from the rest of the cast. I honestly think that Mizuki, An, Rui, and Shizuku are four of the strongest characters the game has to offer, because their unique vocal traits combined with their eccentricities and more elaborate visual designs help them stand out and feel incredibly likable even if you don't read the story. Because the whole spiel of character design is you should be able to take one look at a character and one listen of their voice and immediately tell what they're all about. Contrasted against characters like Honami, Ena, Ichika, and Minori, who honestly have designs and line deliveries like generic NPC characters an RPG would generate rather than members of a main cast. In terms of how the Sekai versions stack up, it's unfortunately slim pickings due to a few questionable production choices that I firmly believe do more harm than good. That's not to say being equal or better than the vocal synth versions is the only bar that I would accept though. Again, for the experience Sekai sets out to do, having the game's original cast involved in the soundtrack still adds to the game in some regard, to the extent of where even if the Sekai versions of a song are inferior, I still pick them when I play the game regardless. This is why when someone criticizes the Sekai versions, I don't see just change it to the V-Synth version then as a viable solution, because the Sekai versions, regardless of quality, are still an aspect of the game's creative identity. continuity. They're still a part of what Sekai is offering in its overall interconnected creative vision, so the option to pick the virtual singer versions is just not a fix in any regard, and it's okay to just acknowledge that the in-house covers have shortcomings. This is one of those instances where don't like, don't listen just isn't doing anyone any favors and does the game a disservice. I still like that the Sekai versions exist. Pointing out the flaws in them doesn't mean you're a Vocaloid boomer who's afraid of change, and suggesting that I simply strip away any semblance of the game having a personality the moment I have very basic and quantifiable issues with it does not sound appealing at all. You should just enjoy the game you're playing by going out of your way to ignore parts of the game, regrettably does not sound compelling. Two of the biggest issues I have pertain to line distribution and an excess of what I will condescendingly call idle shouting. It's a term I've cultivated myself because I'm bitter and age is catching up with me, but when you listen to a song being performed by an idol group and you reach a section where every vocalist is screaming the melody in your face at the same time, that's what I call idle shouting. Not to be confused with basic harmonization or ensemble vocals, because it's kind of a specific vibe, you know? It's a very specific kind of eardrum harassment that's exclusive to idol music. Sekai insists on putting idle shouts in every single song it can get its hands on, even when it doesn't tonally fit the music in any way. I primarily like to pin it on the overall scale of the game's cast. There's way too many fucking characters in this game, with a whopping 26, 6 of which the producers clearly don't even like working with, meaning songs can have as much as 5 performers at any one time. And to go on a quick tangent regarding the game's presentation, this is something that's especially apparent in the 3D MVs. MVs that have easily got the blandest shot composition, map design, choreography, textures, visual effects, and cinematography out of all the modern Miku games that for a moment I honest to god thought the camera angles were randomly generated. The Sekai's poor camera op is trying their absolute hardest to frame 5 people, and all they can give us is extremely lame establishing shots of washed out textures and lighting, or constant cuts that make you lose track of where everyone is on stage. There's no energy to these things that make them fun to watch. Sekai, honest to god, makes DIVA X's MVs look like avant-garde cinema. And funny I should mention PDX, because PDX splurged most of its budget and dev time on having that stage swapping feature nobody asked for, where you can change the map an MV uses. And in Sekai, if your game is broken and it can't recover a map file, the choreographies have been made in such a way that it can be retrofitted to any other map in the game. And I'm fully convinced now that the only reason that feature existed in PDX was so they could get the technology down for Sekai and reuse the same stages across multiple MVs so they don't need to make a new map every single time, which definitely contributes to the rancid vibes these videos give off. Not every song in the game even gets a 3D MV because there's just too many fucking songs and it makes everything feel really inconsistent. But lest we forget the true cardinal sin, they tried cramming half of the MVs into this shitty little letterbox and it looks ugly every single time.
Hey, Sensei! Why are there sometimes black bars at the top and the bottom of the screen?
Oh, they're there to make the show look really cool. Everyone knows widescreen is better than the original aspect ratio.
I thought maybe they were there to hide the subtitles.
Back to the songs themselves, when an in-house cover has 2 or 3 performers, it just narrowly gets away with it. Charles is one of the more elegantly put together duos in the game, because Ena and Mizuki get plenty of lengthy lines, and their voices stand out a bit more from each other compared to Kanade and Matthew, who like to blend a little bit from song to song, as well as kill the energy of whatever song they perform. But as the number starts cranking up, you end up with Sekai covers where the producers have to try their damnedest to make sure 5 people each get their own fair share of a 2-minute song, giving twice a run for their money when it comes to clunky-ass line distribution. So you'll have a character spit out, I don't know, 4 chunks of hiragana before it's time for them to either never be heard again for the next 2 minutes, or to scream their lungs out with their vocal cords blending in with everyone else's. I do praise the Sekai covers for their diegesis and being able to convey some sense of characterization. After all, one of the most effective ways you can tell a story in a rhythm game is to just play a song that thematically relates to the story and world the player is immersing themselves in. And I think being able to hear the characters sing and see them dance is a very effective way of bonding with them as a player. But solo lines and solo performances are so few and far between, or relegated as optional extras, that you'll need to pull out spectrograms just to tell the characters apart. Okay, I'm gonna ask a series of questions to hopefully narrow you guys down. First off, raise your hand if you have familial trauma. Emu and Nene, they blend too much. They're basically the same voice with different amounts of intonation. Everyone in Leonid, it's like picking different font sizes. The one remedy is cover cards, where as you level up a character rank, you can unlock optional covers of just one or two of the vocalists performing, but even that has its limitations. These things are scarce, they are like gold dust, but additionally, there are only so many covers available across the entire setlist, and I would kind of just want the primary songs and MVs to be purposely directed around a smaller amount of characters. Like, this is their moment, this is their time to shine, we chose this one person to sing this one song for a very particular reason, so they can potentially develop as their own character rather than just being an accessory for the leader. In other words, some deluded people in this world actually want Honami to have screen time for some reason. It would certainly have been a lot more enthralling than going into a storefront and choosing if I want the lyrics to be printed in Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman, or Comic Sans. Again, Sekai doesn't really have too much of a holistic framework going on that actually guides you through its creative intent, and kinda just likes to throw different segmented and detached things at you. Because the team see everyone being able to see their J-pop biases as more valuable than ludology, so they just make 20 different characters the main protagonist. Every time an event finishes and a new song is released alongside it, the solo cover featuring the character who the event is about is always the superior version because it has meaning to it, but the default setting is the everyone is screaming version. Sekai feels like an expansion pack for a game that doesn't exist yet. Like I'm missing the full game that all of this content was meant to be structured for because it was just designed to be more content and nothing else. And even if you do go for the solos, they sometimes fucking delay their vocal takes in the mastering, so even though it's supposed to be one person singing, it's edited to sound like 50 clones idol shouting. I'm obviously not saying that group numbers fundamentally can't work. Nijiro Stories is actually the perfect gold standard of Sekai versions. It's a musical show tune type number, meaning the group vocals actually have a purpose. It paints the idea of an ensemble cast coming together before the curtain falls, and you can pick out every vocalist distinctly. The song excels at feeling deliberately constructed to allow each vocalist room to breathe. Performing alongside Kaito and Meiko means that Nene and Rui actually stand out so much more compared to when they're performing with Tsukasa and Emu, and each character gets their moment to shine that just works within the context of this song. And that level of build-up is kind of what you need when you're making a structured and characterized rhythm game where the songs are made with the interactive product in mind. Sure, actual music groups in real life don't have dramatic solo preambles where every member is succinctly developed before they sing together, and some musicians would deem being able to identify each vocalist in an ensemble as a harsh and non-conformant method of production. But again, this is a holistic, narrative-focused rhythm game that has the cast involved in the soundtrack and not an actual band. A rhythm game like this doesn't follow the theory of standalone music, it follows the theory of a musical, songs that complement the presentation and storytelling of a broader work. One of the main reasons the beginning medley in Project DIVA X works so well is because at that point in the game you've only been hearing Miku sing, and your objective is to restore the singing abilities of the rest of the cast in order to travel to other areas where they have their own songs. So it's not just any group number, it's not any old song. It's a culmination, it's an event, it's a climactic finale to the opening arc of the player's own narrative that makes the group singing together all the more exciting and rewarding, to which you're given ample time to get to know each vocalist and their singing style as you access each cloud. Granted, most of the setlist is Miku, but at least there's something there. There's structure, and you can easily walk away from one playthrough of PDX with a firm understanding of how each character sings, and you're not staring at a gacha card you unlocked wondering if the character in the artwork is generic anime girl number 1 or number 12. The group number in X is an exception. It's not the main sound that forges the game's identity, because that would just bog down the cast's musical characterization. Sekai's issue with its in-house covers is it tries to take roughly the same production method that's been done in idol gachas for years and attempts to paint it over as many different songs and themes as it can, while making sure a high volume of characters each get a fair share, even if the song simply doesn't suit that style of production or a character's vocal style, and then casually drops it on what is already an incoherent mess of a game design narrative where nobody has an established character role that makes the storytelling cohesive. Melty Land Nightmare, Patchwork Staccato, Tale of the Deep Sea Lily, Drop Pot Candy, Love Trial, Near, Law Evading Rock, Hitorimbo Envy, and much, much more are simply the tip of the iceberg of Sekai covers where even if the cover itself isn't exactly awful, it still kind of tramples on the tone and the vibes of the original song because the idol shit just doesn't work with it and makes the listening experience less enjoyable. The work ethic of Project Sekai feels less like how can we flexibly work our voice talent into these songs, and feels more like how do we crumple up this song so it can fit into this fixed and overly defined tone our game has.
Hi again, it's me, editing room interjection, and because it's been 3 months since then, my beard is significantly longer. I have come up with the closest possible way I can describe why most of the Sekai covers sound like shit. I decided later on in the game's life cycle to bite the bullet and just swap back over to the virtual singer versions en masse on my copy of the game, and I found that I was enjoying a lot more of the set list in terms of like the songs that I never heard before, and I was wondering why that was, and the only way I can conceivably describe it in words is when you're scrolling through the set list and you're listening to all the previews all together in succession. All the Sekai versions sound like the most generic AI-generated anime openings that you've ever heard in your entire life. But then, when you swap to the virtual singer versions, they actually sound like unique songs that were actually made by talented songwriters who know what they're doing. Like I'm just gonna dress this footage with like the thumbnails of the songs that come to mind when I come up with this analogy. All of these sound like shite in Sekai.
As much as I do enjoy what the VAs have provided for us with their voices, everything else in the surrounding package just isn't able to do their performances any favours. But to continue with this line of thought, you've probably all been waiting for this, let's talk about the NT mandate, I guess. If you've listened to the Sekai versions and thought, hey, all the Vocaloids sound really, really bad, well, there's a story to that. Miku and her friends are all pieces of software you can install on your computer to make digital vocals, and they've all had different iterations over the years with different updates and features. During her tenure on the Vocaloid engine, Miku not only had her Vocaloid 2 release, but received 2 core updates in the form of Miku V3 and V4X. Now, this next part is pure speculation, so keep that in mind, but as the 2010s began to close out, Vocaloid was not doing so hot. Their newest upgrade to their engine, Vocaloid 5, wasn't selling terribly, but to cut a long story short, many vocal synth competitors were gradually building up steam at this time, and many voice bank developers were pulling out of working with Yamaha due to various annoyances, such as the Vocaloid 5 editor having significantly higher licensing and development costs compared to previous iterations, or how Yamaha immediately suspended sales of the Vocaloid 4 editor to third-party distributors as soon as V5 launched. Thank you, Yamaha. Very cool. It's not that Vocaloid 5 underperformed, but nobody wanted to drop new banks for it, and nobody wanted to use the banks that did come out because they were really boring and derivative. Make Mikoto stand stay coping. So one thing led to another, yada yada, and Krypton Future Media, Miku's developer and distributor, announces Hatsune Miku NT, the next Hatsune Miku voice bank and the first to be released exclusively on Krypton's very own V-Synth engine, Pia Pro Studio NT. And reactions are mixed to say the least. Not much is known about Pia Pro NT's synthesis engine other than how vastly different it is to Vocaloid, which led to a huge impact on how the signature Hatsune Miku vocal sounds.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do.
To put bluntly, Miku NT is messy. The Vocaloid bank was not perfect in every way, but it was at the very least clean in some regard, while Miku NT is very noisy and staticky and muffled. One could argue it makes her voice sound brighter and more energetic, but as a result it also sounds more harsh, nasally, and generally unpleasant depending on who you speak to.
One of the things that I was asked to check out by my friend Mia, who sent me the solfege files of Miku's 2 different banks, was she recommended that I look at the waveforms. And the thing is, they're not, like, egregious, there's nothing, like, too distinct about both of them, but there's a few small things that are, like, pretty fucking disgusting in their own way. So, on the left, we've got Miku V4X running in Vocaloid.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol.
And then on the right, we have Miku NT running in Pia Pro.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol.
So, excluding, like, all the stuff we can pick up with the human ear, like, NT just sounds generally muffly, she sounds like she's been shoved into a pillow. The one thing that stands out to me is that on Fat and Soul, I want to say, there's kind of like this fullness that V4X has, where it's a full syllable. In NT, there's kind of like these really elongated, sharp, blown-up consonant sounds. And I feel like that's something that makes listening to it all the more worse. So like, when I play V4X...
Mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, mi, fa, sol,
like, it's to the point, it's straight to the consonant. While with NT...
do, re, mi, fa, sol.
It's like 50% consonant on the file. Like, this spike is really, really annoying me more than it should. It's like it's been equalized by Utao's singing synth engine. Like, Miku NT deadass sounds like an Utao. I'm looking through my notes right now, and I forgot about the bit that Mia wrote about NT, where she says, can just barely hit C4, the first note in solfege, without becoming the sound it makes when you get a bubble shield in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Right, so I wanted to do something a bit challenging for myself that I've never really done before. I've heard that NT isn't the most pleasant to mix, so I'm going to set a loop region on V4X, and I'm gonna do my typical mixing setup that I do on all my VSynth covers, and then I'll see how it sounds when I move over to NT. I'm gonna do limiter, and then I'm gonna add Maximus, and I'm going to do a mastering preset. Don't tell anyone I use a mastering preset. Limiter on its default. We're gonna use Maximus again, because we want that fabulous de-essing, because Lord knows NT needs it.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do.
Okay, so
Do, do, re,
I think
mi,
I want
fa,
to like
sol, la, si, do.
lower it and then
Do,
raise it
re,
here.
mi, fa, sol, la, si, do.
Because now it's a bit more bold and dignified.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad with V4X. I have said before that I find that out of a lot of main V-synths, that Miku V4X is like one of the easiest vocal synths I've ever had to mix with, because her Vocaloid is just that inherently clean. But let's give it a try on NT.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do.
I made it worse?
At this point in the vocal synth industry, this was an issue that was incredibly apparent as we had just reached the advent of AI synthesis, the process of machine learning algorithms that analyze song data in order to closely mimic the finer details of a voice provider's singing style. Hell, Dreamtonics, the company behind SynthV, decided to flex for no reason by making an AI bank of a vocalist who sings in Chinese dubs of Disney movies, so Pia Pro Studio NT is not a very well-regarded vocal synthesizer in the broader 2020s community, especially as the editor has been out for a while now, with very few improvements. So why are we mentioning Miku NT? Because Pia Pro NT is also the most widely used vocal synth engine for the in-house covers of the game's setlist. Whenever you hear a virtual singer in the Sekai versions, it's 95% of the time Pia Pro Studio NT and not Vocaloid. Even if the vocalist isn't Miku, the producers are using a prototype of that vocalist running on the NT framework and tuning and mixing the vocals from scratch instead of ripping them directly from the original, with some minor exceptions. And combined with the loud vocal mixing and flat tuning styles they went for in these renditions, it's hard not to get tonal whiplash at the absolute contrast these banks give off. Vocal synths have been around for a while now, with Vocaloid itself making its debut in 2004. We know a lot about how to synthesize digital vocals and mix them in post, to the point of being able to make them from the comfort of our own home. I am one such insane person. So while yes, virtual singers are very distinct and artificial, they're not supposed to clash with human singers this severely. And to hear this kind of output in the in-house music of an officially licensed Hatsune Miku title is somewhat stunning to say the least, especially after the phenomenal commission stuff like the PDX medleys. things. But let's broaden things out a little bit. This sounds initially microscopic, and rightly so. If someone hasn't at least once in their life hunched over a desk for 4 hours a day to figure out how to make the anime lady say it's difficult to believe that the anime lady in question sounding like a malfunctioning Staples button is in any way a significant issue. But where it starts to really turn unfortunate is the move to NT also had an effect on the distinction between vocalists and the vocal options available to them. In vocal sense, there's a term called engine noise, which describes any and all artificial noise combined with the voice of the original provider, be it background static or a faint buzzing caused by the pitch correction system. In Pia Pro NT, the engine noise is overwhelmingly dominant over the unique vocal tones of each voice provider, and as such, the virtual singers, especially the ladies, now have very similar muffly subdued singing voices that lack a lot of the strength and clarity that Vocaloid originally provided for them. This is combined with the weakening of very imperative features from Vocaloid that gave the singers more versatility, such as appends, alternate voice banks that use samples of the vocalist singing in a different tone of voice to encapsulate different genres. Miku's V4X software had original, soft, solid, dark, and sweet, while the current build of Miku NT only has original, whisper, and dark. And again, Pia Pro NT's engine noise hinders a lot of the uniqueness that these expressions would have had anyway, that Luca, of all things, ends up almost sounding like a weird bootleg Mako append. Combining the idle stylism that the covers railroad themselves into, and the NT mandate, and the Sekai versions at large aren't disappointing because of subjective whimpering about the engine noise or mixing or line distribution. This isn't just an issue that applies to Audioverse superfans who are terminally online. No, my biggest issue is its mass homogenization of a wide selection of music from a wide selection of creatives, which dulls the overall package, to the point where it doesn't even highlight the cast that was made for the game, meaning it helps no one. A lot goes into a song that is still preserved in Sekai, such as the instrumentation and lyrics, but what also allowed these songs to shine was they each had a unique sense of style to them that was carried further by how that producer uniquely executed their vocals, not just in terms of tuning, but also mixing and post-production, how the vocals blended with the instrumentation, especially as the versatility of Vocaloid allowed the same character to sound so different from person to person, meaning each creative effectively had their very own Miku. And side note, this is even something that could have been done with the virtual singer subunits, like having it so each version of Miku from each of the units uses a different voice bank, and has vocals tuned by a different producer to make them really stand out, because as it stands right now, the only virtual singer subunit who feels like their own standalone character is Nightcord Miku and maybe Wonderland's Luca, if you consider narcolepsy a personality trait. Even the dialogue changes when a singer used a different module aura in PDX were significantly more dynamic and played more with the software compared to what we received in Sekai with the subunits.
うまくいったな。クリアできたのね。素敵よ。いつかとみんなに本当の思いを見つけてほしいんだ。でも、その思いは忘れないでいてほしいな。本当の思いを見つけたとき、その思いから
Vocal synth games feel really cool and interesting to play because it feels like you're learning and exploring an entirely new subculture of music tech in the form of a bright and colourful anime adventure, and they're engaging because they carry some form of informational value about the culture they spawned from, and being able to see the humanity behind it was how it got its soul. And Project DIVA, if anything, was significantly more faithful to this philosophy than Sekai, despite having less immediate characterization to it and not really acknowledging the producers as much, because by not having to follow a strict creative vision, they could kind of go ham with just about whatever when it came to its tone and direction. But by not trying to maintain these different tones and themes in order to make them all work in an idle game, what Sekai ends up accomplishing is actively contributing to making a wide ecosystem of music look and sound as samey and derivative as possible, which feels at odds with the producer-focused creative direction the game wanted to aim for. Even the original cast in of itself feels incredibly thin and derivative with very little variation in terms of backgrounds and archetypes. For example, why are all of the middle-class high school students who live in the same city? If you want to design a game that illustrates the diversity of its creative background, wouldn't that be better conveyed by the units having different age groups, occupations, and cultures? Like, the most influential works in the entire community were made by people who were pushing their late 20s, so making the game consist of nothing but teenagers just feels like a mark that was missed a million miles away, like the team just didn't understand the target audience of the source material. Sekai is an extremely ironic game, because it's the first Pia Pro vocal synth game to have human beings beings in its main cast, but its actual content has the least sense of humanity I've ever seen in the series. It's a poor representation of the ecosystem it markets itself towards, because all it does is throw the contributions of many into a big melting pot lacking in an engaging identity, and perpetuate the idea that vocal synth music isn't real serious music until a quote-unquote proper singer does the vocals. It takes a song and tries to harshly shove it down into a unit's very restrictive one-dimensional archetype with very little room for experimentation.
The commentary will never stop. The commentary will never stop. I can't stop thinking of things to say about this game, and something else that came to mind is that if I were a musician and I composed a track and then it ended up being in Project SEKAI, this is probably just me, I feel like I would be low-key offended if my song was put in Leonid, right? I feel like that would be an indictment on my songwriting abilities as far as how the developers perceive me. No, you know what would be even worse, right? Even worse, I would be offended if my song got added in and it was just put in the virtual singer category, like that generic category where they just lump the song in, they don't give it a PV, they don't give it a Sekai cover, they just slap your song in and they don't do any, like, original presentation whatsoever. Tell me if I'm, like, in the minority here, but I feel like, as someone who loves the rhythm game genre, I feel like the genre was made for animatic nerds, like, you know, when you would be at a car journey, you would be on some kind of road trip with your family, you put your headphones on, you listen to music, and you look out the window and you're just imagining an entire, like, music video in your head to whatever song you're listening to. That's what the genre was made for. That's who the genre was made for. So the way I see it, when a song is implemented, the very least that you can deliver is like unique presentation elements that characterize the song in some way, that you're not just slapping the song into your game, you're adapting it into this broader, wider work. So when there are songs in Sekai where it's just like, we just took the artwork and we just added the song in, it's just like, who the fuck do you think you are?
But this isn't even part of some sanctimonious please think of the artist standpoint. To suggest that Vocaloid was a hit countercultural indie scene that only became corporate when Sekai came along would be incredibly disingenuous. Vocal synths are inherently corporate, and require corporate bullshittery to continue so long as capitalism rings on high. Yamaha distributed Vocaloid since the very beginning, and Project DIVA is like corporate as fuck the video game, but that's not the big sin that's worth talking about here. Sekai's worst sin is it had the opportunity to be a rhythm game using the most diverse source material ever made that would allow just about any ham as fuck idea to be realized, and this was the most experimental and imaginative thing that was deemed possible. Because it's the 2020s, our generation is fueled by excessive content consumption, so the quality of media isn't determined by its execution, it's determined by the amount of fandom material it has so we have something to do on Twitter for the next few weeks. Because who needs meaningful ludonarrative in your video games when you can just make a tier list of the best scrunklies? The worst part about gacha isn't the fact that it's gacha, but that the cards you unlock continue to show the characters in significantly more interesting settings and styles that a game that gave a shit would actually do something with. Sekai's not killing culture. It's not smothering Miku in her sleep, and to suggest that to be the crux of Sekai's problems would be so wrong, like literally incorrect. It's just that it's a personality mosquito that sucks dry every pre-established license that it touches. It's just a disappointing product when I expected something significantly more fun. Because it should be impossible, no, illegal, to take something as fundamentally fun and interesting as vocal synth culture and make something boring out of it. It's like you took salted caramel and turned it into porridge, love. It's fucking mingin'. Sekai took the source material of the masses and made it into an output of literally nothing. And when time and resources are going into something that unimpressive and dull, when you know it could have been so much more, you can't help but be curious. No, Hatsune Miku is not the main character of Project Sekai, we've heard that enough times. But if her vocal performance is still making the game that little bit worse by going against the game's creative direction and its literal message, well, that distinction doesn't matter here, does it? The other thing to keep in mind about Sekai's goals as a game is, as a live service, it aims to grab our attention for as long as possible. It's very easy to suggest that a lot of the issues I take with the game can be easily ironed out through additional content, like new songs, new covers, and new charts. Hell, people are already saying that because the Japanese version is a bit further ahead in its life cycle, so has more content. But because being a live service is a means of doing business that continues an existing outcome, not a creative decision that can rework itself into something substantially new, the ways in which it keeps you playing ring extremely hollow, and I highly doubt Sekai would just casually pull a No Man's Sky with the amount of money it makes in its current state. Sekai has a gameplay loop that is infectious for all the existentially wrong reasons, similar to other gacha games like Genshin, FE Hero, Sudoruka, and Gai. It loves to send you on grinding crusades where you find the best way to micromanage your 50 million currencies and stack the numbers up high. And don't get me wrong, I'm a numbers guy in my games. I fixate on that shit very easily. I was the one who'd pull out the fusion calculator when playing SMT. But then something dawned on me. The gameplay systems in gacha games have to be so dumbed down in order for the economy and balancing to work that it doesn't matter what the gameplay actually is. Gacha games are just that. Gacha is their core genre, and then they wear the woolen fleece of another genre to trick you into thinking the gameplay is actually substantial. Project SEKAI is just a very colourful looking notification dismissal simulator disguising itself as a rhythm game. The core gameplay is going through menus and min-maxing everything, so you can get out of actually having to do more gameplay, because the business model in place quite literally prevents it from having the same amount of scale and depth as a console title, as made especially evident by how 10 times a day you can actually have the game autoplay the charts for you so you get loot and XP automatically. You know, if I was told this was the future of video games, I probably would have picked up a different hobby. Maybe I would have gotten a degree, or a house, or a wife and kids. Or at the very least I would have married an old rich man for his money, only for him to mysteriously pass away in a skydiving incident. The only thing you need to focus on in your card setups is talent, so it amounts to picking the ones with the biggest numbers and nothing else, meaning you never really need to make different builds for different units, songs, or game modes unless an event comes along. And this is the real kicker, are you ready for this? As soon as you get a team of 5 4-star cards, you literally never need to pull from the gacha ever again, because all you need are 5 cards that have the highest level cap, and building cards takes so much work and items that you're sure as shit not gonna spend time making new builds if it means less resources for your main one. If you've unlocked Side Story Part 2 on a 4-star, shut up, no you haven't. Most of the best cards in my collection are from the first 4 banners the game ever had, and as a result, the most viable thing for me to spend my crystals on is energy, so I can grind for more materials for the cards I don't like, but are forced to like, because they're viable. And all these currencies and materials don't even mesh well with the game's themes if you want to make another case for ludonarrative dissonance.
I'm bored. It sure is hard work having to deal with both my school life and my emotionally neglectful upbringing, but I need an outlet for my trauma. On top of that, my Spotify's bugged. Hey, is that a flashbang?
Well, I'm here with the solution, bestie.
Holy shit, is that Melodyne Girl?
That's right. And I'm here to heal your fast deteriorating mental health. Have you considered a gambling addiction?
Not really.
Well, too bad.
The meta is so linear and nonsensical, it even affects the length of every song in the setlist. Every song in Sekai is severely cut down in order to make them all approximately 2 minutes long, and this was done for the purpose of balancing the game's meta so none of the songs become more or less viable to grind from. Now, for the record, I don't actually have a fundamental bug up my butt when it comes to song cutting in rhythm games. I think you should absolutely cut songs if they're way too long, like over 4 minutes or so, and I even advocate song cutting if it means skipping a repeated verse or chorus where nothing in the charting would change. This is one of the many reasons I don't like Project SEKAI, because every song is full length in that game, meaning you need to play really unnecessary song sections that bog down the gameplay, like the second verse and chorus of World Is Mine. Reverse Rainbow is a full 5 minutes long, and I hate every second of it. But in Sekai, the cuts are just shoddy. It feels like the game was very much deliberately constructed to rush you through the key footnotes of every song to the point where it ends when you think you've just started. You're not listening to the song, you're listening to a Spark Notes summary that has a rough approximation of what the song sounds like. It's the future tone cut of no logic, but if it were the entire set list. Tell Your World is one of the biggest offenders because it cuts out a very intense build-up before its final chorus and just plays 2 choruses back to back. Then, after the finale, the end screen comes up and fades the MV out before you get a chance to hear the ending piano slowly play the track out. Tale of the Deep Sea Lily and Romeo and Cinderella very awkwardly hard cut to a higher key for the last couple of measures because they both cut out the last chorus which has a key change, and Solitary Envy, well, it's the most in-meta song in the game, and I hate that for all of us. It's not interested in touring you through the tonal dynamics of a song, it just plays the vague impression of the song that people are familiar with, because the game knows you're not actually here to immerse yourself in music or actually enjoy the charting, you're just here for more magical seeds to make your JPEGs better. It's not a glorious presentation of emotion and discovering your true feelings like Miku promised, it's just leyline outcrops, but if leyline outcrops were the entire game. And I fully understand the intent behind the balance. balancing. Sekai actually has a system where you get more rewards for playing longer songs in order to attempt to deter players from spamming shorter ones for easy wins. But whose fault was it to implement a progression system that actively encourages you to not give a shit about the music you're playing, grind for currencies in limited time frames so you don't miss out on rewards, and constantly play FOMO catch up with a never-ending stream of meaningless content? Melt isn't even that fucking long, guys. You can cope when it comes up in co-op. And Lord knows all the events are pretty much the same functionally. They give different cards, add a new visual novel each time, and sometimes it's a splatfest, but what is it that makes each event stand out from one another truly? What makes Christmas different from Halloween for the player? What memorable moments are there to share as a community if the most we can do in this game is grind for a leaderboard that rewards spending money above all else without ever seeing or interacting with one another? Why is this game a live service and not just a full paid offline game? I genuinely don't understand why there's so much audience demand to make every video game under the sun a light MMO where you have to wait 2 to 5 years for the other half of the game to get patched in. I get it from a business standpoint because then every game now has the potential to be a consistent revenue stream, but it's the fact that there's a demand for it where people genuinely ask for it that I don't get. Because unless the game in question actually demands multiplayer and live service elements in order to literally function, it's always going to be inferior to a game that's just finished on day one and has an ending in it. Sekai is not truly benefiting from a game design perspective whenever it tries to be Vocaloid's answer to an MMO or SEG. It's not just bad because it's a live service, but it's a bad live service regardless that anyone who's played an MMO or competitive PC game would scoff at. And according to a bunch of my friends who play other gacha games, it's a bad gacha too. Like, the economy and drop rates just suck, and the late game stinginess makes the progression system completely stagnant after about 2 events with no way to recover without skipping 3 to 5 banners just to save. There's this really common tip in achievement guides for Project DIVA F2, where players recommend that if you want a quick and easy way to grind for DIVA points so you can buy every item, you just spam packaged over and over, because it's one of the shorter songs in the game and it has one of the easiest charts to play with challenge boosts. But the vast majority of players just looked at that and went, oh, neat. I'm not gonna fucking do that though because I'm employed. And then we just enjoyed the game at our own pace until we eventually got the DIVA points we needed. Because in that game, the presence of meta exploits doesn't immediately mean people are insane enough to use them. And if they are, that's an indictment on whether or not your game needs those exploits in order to start being fun, or if players feel pressured to race through the game as fast as possible before more busy work gets added in. Or as I like to call it, the Citus 2 effect. I will never let go of Citus 2. In Project DIVA X, you get a free gacha roll that gives you a full-on outfit at the end of every individual song. In Sekai, doing a challenge run of only one song every real-world day has the potential likelihood of giving you 1/16 of the currency you need to unlock a JPEG. And the outfits for some reason use an extremely rare material that ensures you only get one outfit for one character every 2 real-world months or so. Because the only scenario in the game that actually reaps benefits for its publisher is scenarios where a customer is bored, frustrated, or impatient. And the outfits aren't even that nice. Like, none of them are character specific, and the designs feel super muted and uninspired. The module customization also sucks too. Like, in DIVA, you can just add whichever character models you want to a video, and in PDX, the outfits have stat changes, but you at least have options, and earning new outfits is easy. But in Sekai, you have to equip each character's individual outfit across the whole game, and then when you uncheck the option to use the default characters, the 3D MV only uses the characters from whatever cards you have equipped, meaning you can't use a character in an MV if you don't have any decent cards of them that you would actually want to use. I don't see how you could fuck up this much. DIVA was designed as an engaging video game that people have already spent money on, and rewards you for just having fun. Sekai, on the other hand, has to design itself to be a worse game on the off chance it might make terminally online teenagers throw money at it. But we applaud it anyway because in a couple years' time it'll have 50 million songs or something. So we end up with a game that's poorly constructed holistically, has really uninspired gameplay and art direction, and to add on to all of that, the game's economy is so bare bones and predatory that the game itself literally could not give 2 shits about if you're actually playing it. It's almost like single-player video games where you barely interact with other players will eternally have a stink on them when live service elements are introduced, because it transparently conveys to the user base that the game was designed as a product first, and anything that's implemented into the game is not done so with the main priority being to make a good product, but instead to make a busywork simulation client that superfluously feeds back to the player with a bunch of bullshit to convince them to continue playing for longer than anyone should ever touch a single-player game for. Yes, more improved content could be added over time, like better MVs, covers, and charts. Yes, the constant updates mean the game will go on for as long as it can, so you always have events and songs to come back to. But who cares if none of that improves the game at its core? The core is what has problems, and putting more shit into the core doesn't make the game better. If day 1 of Sekai is a mediocre rhythm game with 30 songs, day 365 of Sekai is still a mediocre rhythm game, but this time it has 150 songs. If the English version of Sekai is mediocre, the Japanese version is sure as shit equally as mediocre. And the only thing waiting for me whenever I take a break from the game is 30 new charts that I don't want to play and 10 new visual novels that I don't want to read. Because easily one of the worst things that happened to the game industry was when we Stockholmed ourselves into thinking cramming the same game with meaningless content over and over is somehow better than just making and playing new, more substantial games. And the only course of action is not to finish the game in a satisfying way that leaves me with nothing but good thoughts about it, but to instead persevere until I get burned out and walk away with nothing but negativity. Because live service elements in games that do not demand them in any way are just an inevitable crash and burnout. They are fated by design to never have a happy ending. So I may as well just go while I still can, shouldn't I?
So it's 2023 now. To be exact, it is the 7th of January 2023 at 1:15 in the morning as I record this, and I kind of wanted to just shoehorn, like crowbar this into the video last minute because this has taken so long to produce that I think I've reached an epiphany on just how I consume media by just talking about this one game. I don't want to like make this completely personal just to like take a cheap shot at making it all like emotional and getting pity points for myself, but the long story short of it, for anyone who's like new to my brand, is that I have been struggling with mental health issues for the longest time. I have been in counseling since, I want to say, mid-2019, after I considered the possibility that I have anxiety and depression, and those are something that I want to say I've been grappling with for as long as I can remember. Like, it's one of those things that comes naturally. Like, you don't need a tragic origin story for it to come to you. Like, it just comes. It appears. And one of the impacts over the course of my development is that I've come to realize that I have a tendency to be very apathetic. I kind of let life go on its own. I go with the flow. I take things on a whim, and I don't really like to plan ahead all that much because the future scares me, you know? And what I've come to realize that's actually kind of funny to think about is that my ranking scale of different games, but mostly rhythm games, but basically other games, is I kind of run games on an apathy scale. I basically rank games highly if they let me fucking feel something. And I think that's what led to this passion of wanting to figure out what makes media tick so that I can identify things that make me feel. And I think that's why Sekai disappointed me so much, because I was able to apply all that I've discovered, and my conclusion was, I felt nothing.
I was talking to a good friend of mine about this video as I was working on it, and one of the things they immediately sent me was a 2-hour-long video essay called Fighting in the Age of Loneliness Supercut Edition. I haven't actually seen it yet, it's about MMA, so I haven't really made time for it, but man, it still holds some fascinating parallels that sum up my feelings on Sekai. To quote my friend in a Twitter DM, This video is about how MMA, an extremely niche sport that attracted the outcasts and doldrums of society, caught interest by the upper class as an outlet in this sanitized world. Then lobbyists and the owner tried to make it as sanitized and respectable, read profitable, as any other sport, and stripped it of what made it stand out to begin with. They then timestamped a quote in the video for me to listen to that goes as follows. What was once a weird refuge for those who needed it, is now eroding into just another thing that's just as formless and indistinct as everything else. If you somehow make it to the end and you're not an MMA fan, I hope you take one thing away from all of this. This will happen to everything that you love. Nothing you like will remain untouched, and will get further and further monetized into meaninglessness. This isn't just a problem in our idiotic blood sport. You're fucked too. First thing I want to immediately say is, again, I do not want to push some narrative about how vocal synth culture was some free-spirited, rebellious movement, and then all of a sudden Project SEKAI specifically ruined it something capitalism. I would have no leg to stand on if that were the case, because the subject of comparison I used for a positive contrast is another product that was born from a group of executives wanting to capitalize on the outlets of the outcast, something capitalism. Hell, I think it's fair to extend this to the V-synth community also, as in its creators, you guys. Countless artists and groups have made it big in the music industry, and some have definitely made some questionable choices and business decisions in the name of greed, so like, nobody's immune from any of this shit. World is a fuck, and my enemies are in power. I don't aid society by reminding you of that. I'm not making any substantial change in the world. So I think there's a different conversation we can have for right now about the silly little games we play. This video is not and was never going to ever be a video about how Vocaloid culture has lost its soul, because you can't be counterculture when you literally are culture. And this video is not an explicit pro-art anti-capitalist thesis. The core of this video is just game design. My game tastes, and the game industry at large, and all of these other subjects just happen to share a bit of overlap with the society we function in, because video games do not, and never have, functioned in a bubble. Video games, by existing as products in a marketplace, are inherently political because games, their design, their distribution, and their business practices exist in line with global, national, and corporate policy, which is how many of these talking points can come about. My intent is highlighting my concerns with Sekai's design philosophy as it pertains to the homogenization of video games and the commodification of our leisure time, both in and out of the rhythm genre, in order to contextualize the significantly higher bar that games like these should be capable of reaching, and demonstrating how magical the genre can be in the right hands. The rhythm game is significantly more nuanced, and can provide so much more than even its most passionate followers or unaware detractors let on, and so many more moving parts exist to flesh out the genre's greatest entries beyond just the notes that fall down, and the exhausting waterfall of content and extras and community features. Like, what if we had a paid PC and console idol gacha, where instead of multiple units, it's one single unit of people with different personalities and archetypes who learn to embrace each other's uniqueness in a shared structured narrative where you bond with a main protagonist. Then, in a roughly 10 to 20 hour long campaign, the players explore a diverse world with captivating arcs and satisfying conclusions, coupled with a thematically structured setlist and gameplay mechanics where the main priority is drinking in the game's creative vision at the pace the player feels comfortable with, and in a game where they feel their inputs matter, and their journey is theirs, just as it is the characters performing on screen. What if the idol gacha utilized its strengths to give its players a journey where for only a moment, you can forget about the corporate origin of how this product sat itself into your hands? Not only do games take us to a variety of worlds, tell us many stories, and give us a means to pass the time, but their ultimate facet is control. They give the player the agency to take part in so much more than they could ever dream of. That's what allows a game to truly stick with you until the end of time, what allows you to treasure it from as much as one playthrough, because the time you and the game shared was ultimately yours. While the game was made by another party, when you played it, that was your fight, your journey, your struggle, your pain, your love, your anxiety and triumph, and in rhythm games, that was your performance, because the game knows it and reacted as such in order to show just how fantastic it is to be involved in music in any regard, even if you just want to pull up a chair, put on a vinyl, and tap your finger for a bit. You progressed the story, you helped the characters grow, you solved the disaster of the day, and that's what makes your games more fun. Project DIVA, Demo, many other rhythm games like them, they in an esoteric sense belong to me. Not in a literal sense, but I own the time I shared with them. They explored many different creative visions that I could interact with, either to discover more about myself, or to just enjoy the time I spend living on this earth. And they were at least enthralling enough for me to not perceive that time spent as a waste. And just like how an RPG or an adventure game could emotionally affect others on a level beyond standard enjoyment, they are my outlets as an outcast. They are the conductors that allowed my emotions to resonate. And I sincerely hope that this gives some of you a refreshing and exciting way to look at games, thinking about the emotions they lit up from within you and how every little interconnecting factor made every moment that little bit more special. To the extent of where, if you enjoy Sekai, I hope that it's because you're enjoying it with purpose, and take a moment to think about why you connect with the media you do, rather than just consuming for the sake of consuming. Knowing that you can go into the game excited about its offerings, rather than dreading all the busy work you have to do like I did. If you take all the theory I've introduced, and that bolsters your reasons for enjoying this game, that's the kind of self-awareness that anyone would kill to have. It's just a shame that, in order to demonstrate everything here today, I had to use my disappointment towards this game as a case study because it felt the most pertinent. When I write all of this, Project Sekai is a game that I could never own. The story is not mine. The music is not mine. The gameplay is not mine. It's not an experience that was made for me, but in my mind, it wasn't made for any other player either. Everything in the game exists just to keep me doing chores and spending money in the name of a higher financial power that you nor I will ever meet in our entire lives. And it's not directly because you can spend money on it, because it's always online, or because it goes on forever with no satisfying conclusion. Not on a standalone basis anyway, but because those facets combine to get in the way of making something that interconnects into an interactive work that actually provides you with any agency. Meaning the only natural progression the game has is to inevitably burn out and leave it in the gutter to never touch again, for the service to end. For everything to one day shut down, so the most that will ever come up in future conversations is, "Hey Min, do you remember Project Sekai?"
Yeah, I think I do. It was alright, I guess.
Yeah. Nice. Do you remember when they made Mako a barista MILF?
I know!
Project Sekai doesn't just take a culture of music production and crush it down into a sanitized mush, because plenty of games have done that already and that's far from a new sin. But it also takes an entire school of immersive game design and disregards it to make a blank, meager, and tiring product that by design doesn't have anything to offer. Sekai doesn't believe the player matters. Sekai doesn't believe there's anything to a medium beyond the text that appears on screen and the buttons the player presses. And Sekai doesn't have any interest in immersing players in a wide creative ecosystem. And that's all I need for something to make me feel at best tired, and at worst, miserable. What was once a weird refuge for those who needed it is now eroding into just another thing that's just as formless and indistinct as everything else. If you somehow make it to the end and you're not a vocal synth fan, I hope you take one thing away from all of this. This will happen to everything that you love. When you look at every square foot of the game, you can summarize Sekai's intent very clearly. Not just as a vocal synth game, but as a rhythm game, a live service, and many categories beyond that. Sekai takes what you love and monetizes it into meaninglessness. And that sounds like a problem that would only exist in an idiotic blood sport, but honestly, we were fucked too. Sorry, hang on, I'm swapping the footage. I need to show you guys something. See? That feels better, doesn't it? It almost makes you feel something. And isn't that the entire point?
it.